Hello, puppies and kittens. Welcome to another episode of Blasphemers Bible. I'm in such an awkward situation where I keep trying to meet these deadlines that I set for myself, and then I end up working until 4 in the morning just so I can get so that I can go to sleep by 5, so that I can wake up and do time to do this show like 3 hours later. Yeah, I know that Lawrence and Tomer know my pain because I know their dedication to this show. They do the same thing. So very proud of these people. Anyway, anybody got the opening comments today?
I mean, I don't have any in particular.
Okay.
I'm very
Let's jump
excited
in
to read a little more into this whole hide and seek that David and Saul are about to play, and just gets more and more excited.
They do. It feels like they're dragging everyone else into their kinky games. Like just bone in the cave and leave us out of it, dude.
All right, so we'll just dive into it then. And who is reading today?
That's a very good question.
Not all at once, please.
We are all so Canadian about this. My God.
So,
Okay.
Isaac, Lilith.
Yeah, sure. Why not? It's
Did I
been a
read
while.
last week? I feel like I did. Did I?
You did. No, it's Mark.
did.
Mark actually.
I read last week.
Oh, okay.
I'll read. Don't worry about it.
Okay.
Read
So-
up to 18, including.
18. Very good. All right. Now, I will ask, first of all, how to pronounce this name. Keila?
Keila.
Keila. Very good. Thank you. So, 1 Samuel 23. When David was told... hang on a sec. When David was told, look, the Philistines are fighting against Keila and are looting the threshing floors, he inquired of the Lord, saying, shall I go out and attack these Philistines? And the Lord answered, go and attack the Philistines and save Keila. The Lord answered him. Okay, then David's men said to him, here in Judah we are afraid. How much more then if we go into Keila against the Philistine forces? Once again, David inquired of the Lord, and the Lord answered him, go down to Keila, for I am going to give the Philistines into your hand. So David and his men went to Keila, fought the Philistines, and carried off their livestock. He inflicted heavy losses on the Philistines and saved the people of Keila. Now Abiathar, son of Ahimelech,
Oh.
Ahimelech,
Achimelech.
whatever. Son of Ahimelech, had brought the ephod down with him when he fled to David at Keila. Someone has the video playing in the background, and I'm hearing an echo of my voice.
Not.
Oh, really?
For
I
me.
don't hear that.
I don't.
If that's
that
the
you?
case,
Just a small
if that's the
one from
case, then
my
it's you because there's no echo anywhere else.
Yeah, no, on my side.
Okay, well, that's good. Yeah, maybe it's a computer issue. Oh, I need to upgrade. Anyway. Now Saul was told that David had gone to Keila, and he said, God has handed him over to me, for David has imprisoned himself by entering a town with gates and bars. And Saul called up all his forces for battle to go down to Keila to besiege David and his men. When David learned that Saul was plotting against him, he said to Abiathar, the priest, bring the ephod. David said, O Lord, God of Israel, your servant has heard definitely that Saul plans to come to Keila and destroy the town on account of me. Will the citizens of Keila surrender me to him? Will Saul come down as your servant has heard? O Lord, God of Israel, tell your servant. And the Lord said, he will. Again, David asked, will the citizens of Keila surrender me and my men to Saul? And the Lord said, they will. So David and his men, about 600 in number, left Keila and kept moving from place to place. When Saul was told that David had escaped from Keilah, he did not go there. David stayed in the desert strongholds and in the hills of the desert of Sipah. Day after day, Saul searched for him, but God did not give David into his hands. While David was at Horesh in the desert of Ziph, he learned that Saul had come out to take his life. And Saul's son Jonathan went to David at Horesh and helped him find strength in God. "Don't be afraid," he said. "My father Saul will not lay a hand on you. You will be king over Israel, and I will be second to you. Even my father Saul knows this." And the two of them made a covenant before the Lord. And Jonathan went home, but David remained at Horesh.
Okay.
The word of the Lord.
Yeah. Okay. I think I should start if nobody has anything else to say.
Well,
Well,
hold
I
on.
did-
I got a question. You got 600 people hiding. They're going from place to place so they won't get noticed. 600?
Desert caves, kind of.
600 people in a cave.
A
You'd be
set of
surprised.
caves.
Okay, and they're all are they all wearing fake mustaches? I mean,
No, they're wearing what was that green that Robin Hood's men wore? Although it would seem better
Green
to wear
tights.
brown.
all right.
I mean,
so
I-
I'm going to read a comment that has already come in. So Iconicer says, so this is where the origin of Zarahemla is, right? Verse 28.
No.
Verse
What?
28.
No. And I mean, no. I have no idea where this comes from.
I love when Tommy
I mean,
starts to second guess himself.
Sarah. No.
Sela hamachlekot in Hebrew.
Yeah.
I mean, no,
Yeah.
but hey, maybe Joseph was like, good enough.
I mean, if you were to translate it, like if you were to think it was Hebrew and be like Zerah Chemla, it would probably be something like the seed of the Chemla. I don't know.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
I
supposed to
don't
mean
know.
rock of parting, at least in, well, one of the notes. But
For whoever in the audience.
Oh, that's what that. No, that's
Yeah.
what this verse says. Yeah,
Mm.
our
Yeah,
verse
that's-
is going to say the rock of parting, but Zerah Chemla, if that was a Hebrew word, then it would mean like the seed of something.
Yeah, Zarahemla is like one of the major cities in the Book of Mormon.
Sorry,
Yeah.
it's Zarahemla in Reformed Egyptian.
well, I mean, we must go with the original Reformed Egyptian. It would be disrespectful not to.
Yeah.
God, at least Tolkien admitted he was making up languages.
All right, Tomer, go ahead.
I think Lawrence wanted to say something, or
I did want to say two things. One, it was interesting when when Saul says God has given him into my hand, for he has shut himself in by entering a town that has gates and bars. So obviously he's going into a big town, but the imagery of gates and bars locking things in is like that language is super common, especially when we're talking about the sea, because Job, I think it was in Job. The sea is locked in with gates and bars. So it's very interesting to see that that phrase used here for that they're just locked in. And then the other one I was gonna say, when he says that, when Jonathan says that Saul is not gonna lay a hand on him, I'm like, yeah, he's not gonna lay a hand on him. He's gonna throw a spear at him or some shit.
He'll try and kill him before he gets in grabby range. Not least of which because David is apparently very good with a sword.
I think Mark wanted to say something.
Yeah, just regarding the cave, I bet you could fit that many people inside, but the thought that came to mind was that they would have had to be very quiet.
It's very echoey.
Yeah.
Hmm.
I imagine 600 people in a cave would be a bit noisy. Just
Yeah,
the breathing and farting.
Especially men. Gross.
I imagine they're not trying to imply that 600 people were in one cave. It's like in the wilderness, in caves, and you know.
Yeah.
I feel like I mean they must have had like a mole,
woods.
right? Because like somehow, no matter where they move, Saul somehow finds out about it. It's like they're hiding, but are they really like David was easily found before by people that weren't Saul, and it kind of continues to happen that Saul is the only one that can't seem to find them.
Well,
And then-
he has scouts obviously out keeping a look, and clearly, as Aaron pointed out, you can't just jam 600 guys in a cave and stay there permanently. You will end up leaving some signs of your existence. But I think the character assassination of Saul is more interesting here because you notice that these people are being attacked by the Philistines. One would think it was the job of the king to protect his people who are being assailed by foreigners who are taking their bread, the grain from the threshing floor and going to kill them all. That's especially at this time where these are basically petty warlords and bandit chiefs. It's literally your only job is to kill the enemies that are trying to kill your people. And instead, David comes when, the magic ephod tells him he can. But Saul doesn't come until the enemies are gone and only comes to kidnap David.
Yeah, I guess at this point, like as you say, the story is like putting him in a bad light. So like I guess the lesson is like, yeah, better don't call Saul.
Yeah. Don't call Saul.
And then something else. It might have been like David and Jonathan had like walkie-talkies because there's that one part where like, Saul could never find him, even though he's got like 1,000 men looking after him. But then that one time, Jonathan just gets up and goes and finds him. Like,
well, I mean, there's two things here. One is possible that the story is trying to portray David not being caught by Saul as miraculous, like it's divine intervention stopping Saul from being able to capture David. And then there's also the idea of like if David wants to be found by a specific person, he can easily like, oh look, Jonathan is looking for you in the area. Send out a scout to him and bring him in or whatever.
I prefer to think that they left lovers' notes for each other at the old oak, and that he left coded instructions to follow him into the mountains, so they could go and worship the Lord together.
And whatever strengthening his hand means.
I have a comment on that actually.
I'm waiting. I'm looking forward to Tomer and Lawrence.
I'm pretty sure we all have comments on strengthening our hands, Tomer.
Yeah. Shut up. Okay.
Sterling Nash made a good comment.
Uh,
I don't know if you want to read it out loud.
Oh, yeah. David wasn't as well endowed as legend would have it. We've all seen the statue. In fairness, though, it was apparently more prominent, and Michelangelo had to trim it down for Catholic sensibilities.
Coward. So we'll start on verse 1. Keila. Keila. Scholars generally identified with modern Khirbet Kila, about 8 miles northwest of Hebron, and about 3 miles south of Adulam. According to Joshua 15:44, Keila was part of Judah. McCarter writes that the description of Keila being deep in the recesses of the Philistines in verse 3 and the attitude of the lords of Keila in verse 12 suggests that the inhabitants were not Judah at this time, and that Keila was an independent city, much like Jerusalem. Tsumura, however, writes that since David inquires about saving Keila, it seems plausible that it was Israelite, if not Judite, since he wouldn't mind carrying raids against non-Israelite places, as we see in chapter 27. Let me adjust. Okay. On verse 5, carried off their livestock. In Hebrew for carried off is vayinhag, from the root nun he gimel, to drive animals, as we see in Genesis 31:18, Exodus 3:1, and Psalms 82. Several commentators tried to understand why the Philistines had cattle with them. Kimchi proposed that when David struck at them, he chased after those who fled until they arrived at Philistia, and he also took their livestock as spoil. McCarter proposed that the cattle were brought along to forage for what was left on the threshing floor. Herzberg, Klein, and Bar-Efrat proposed that the livestock were used to transport the grain that the Philistines took from Keilah. Tsumura, however, writes that no real solution is possible.
That is fair. If they had been raiding for some time, they may have taken cattle from others or even from the people they were raiding. And obviously, they would need something to carry back their plunder, such as it is. But either way, it is a little...
Yeah. On verse 6, brought the ephod down with him. The Hebrew Bible reads, Ephod yarad beyado, literally, an ephod came down in his hand. The usual understanding of the phrase is that Abiathar went down to Keilah holding an ephod in his hand, as we see in early translations. Kimchi, however, wrote that the ephod came down, not Abiathar, since he did not intend to take the ephod with him, but when he packed his belongings, he also brought the ephod accidentally. Tsumura notes that many commentators think that this verse is in, quote, somewhat awkward position, end quote, and take it as, quote, a gloss added to link Abiathar's use of the ephod in verse 9 with his arrival in 2220, end quote, according to Klein. Therefore, they follow the Septuagint, quote, now when Abiathar fled to David, he had gone down with David to Keilah, taking an ephod with him, end quote. He notes McCarter's opinion that the Septuagint, quote, prepares the reader for the appearance of Abiathar and the ephod in verses 9 forward, and also tightens the connection between the present episode and the foregoing, end quote. Tsumura, however, writes that this interpretation is based on an amended and improved, quote-unquote, text on the basis of the Septuagint. He writes that the Masoretic text makes sense, since 2220 does not state where David was when Abiathar joined him.
So yeah, it seems like this ephod is, at least in function, different than the priestly one, right? Because they're using this one for like it's not like, you know, something that I think it wasn't in the last chapter.
It was
with
there
the
was like
linen
a
ephods
statue
where he went over.
that stand before the ephod as though it was something very large, but this one also clearly performs a divinatory function, but
Yeah,
presumably he was able to travel with it, which honestly, with a religious mindset, that doesn't faze me. It's very natural for them to just like grab the holy thing and run, because holy thing more important than food.
Yeah, so like instead of just because the other ephod, right, it had right, because there were it certainly carried things you could use for like divination, but the purpose of the ephod itself kind of seemed like a like more of a status symbol in like priestly circles, but then here it is mostly used as a oracular device.
I think we have to default, because we did discuss this last episode. I think we have to default to the assumption that at least two different things are referred to as ephods. One being a priestly garment and one being a larger thing, but that an element of potential divination is used each time. I mean, here, David inquires of the Lord, clearly using the ephod. It's a magic 8-ball, but God.
Yeah, and so it could be I'm not even sure it'd be synonymous with the one that was set up. Was it Samson? Was it Gideon? I forget. I think it was Gideon.
I think it's
golden.
Gideon.
Yeah.
Golden.
Who
Yeah,
set up the
I'm not
one.
sure if it's necessarily a large, especially if it's possibly the same thing as, let's say, Trafim or whatever.
Yeah, sure. It could be just like one super special one, then it's true. Doesn't have
It
to be
says
large.
that the sword of Goliath was behind it. Doesn't necessarily mean that it was hidden behind it. It just means that it was beyond it. Let's say, like, here is the ephod, here is the sword.
Like the definition of behind. Okay, yeah.
Yeah,
It would make sense actually for them to have had a travel-sized ephod that could be used for divination, since long before this there is the record in the sense that kings and warriors would wish to consult the Lord before they went into battle, and if they're traveling around because, you know, shit's going down and war doesn't come to your door exactly when you want and where and how, you would kind of need one that you could easily transport.
Maybe that's the origin of the priestly garment ephod, as in it was a garment that carried on it an image of the the ephod in the temple, let's say.
With the stones that could be used for
Like
divination.
yeah, or like I'm saying, like maybe the original one was just an actual, like an image representation of the statue, let's say.
Hmm.
And so it was like a flat relief version, maybe, or whatever. And that's how it became into like the modern version where it doesn't have any imagery on it. It's just a Ouija board.
Yeah.
I also found interesting the contrast between David and Saul, because Saul does also seem to be in communication with God, and he also seems to be thinking that he's getting messages like, "Oh, the Lord has delivered David into our hands" or whatever. But between the both of them, David is really the only one getting the right message.
I mean, we've seen how his son interprets divine messages.
Yeah. More arrows.
Well. Yeah.
It's in fairness, yeah. But if it's a physical mechanism, like think about forms of divination that we've seen throughout history, fiction, whatever, Ouija boards, magic 8 balls, tossing the bones. Do they cross or not cross? Does it go up and down or both up, both down? You can get yes, no, maybe from that no matter what you do. And clearly, post hoc ergo propter hoc, the person who won must have received the right divine messages. Therefore, God was with them and not the other guy who didn't get the right message from the throw of the bones or the stones or the whatever the fuck they were using this for.
And it's this whole 50-50 chance thing. It's no different than just,
Yeah, but the Lord.
The Lord.
Okay, I'll continue
Whoever
on
wins
verse.
the battle is the one who prayed to Joe Pesci.
Yep, exactly. They prayed to the right Joe Pesci.
Okay, I'll continue on verse 7. God has delivered him into my hands. Hebrew Bible reads, Nikar oto Elohim beyadi. God nikar him in my hand. The exact meaning of the verb nikar is unclear. Most early translations and traditional commentators take nikar to mean he gave or delivered, based on the appearance of the verb in Amos 1:12 and Job 31:3. Gersonides derived nikar from the phrase, their enemies who might misjudge, pen yenakiru tsarimo, in Deuteronomy 32:27, writing that Saul said, quote, God removed David's understanding so that he may fall to my hands, end quote. Septuagint reads, God has sold him into my hands, which according to Auld reflects the root mem chaf resh, with quote, sell into the power of, end quote, machar beyad, being an idiom found in Judges 2:14, 3:8, 4 verses 2 and 9. McCarter and Klein take the original reading to be sikar bayad, shut up in the hand of, found also in Isaiah 19:4. McCarter writes that the confusion between nun and samech was possible, especially in scripts of the 2nd century BCE, and confusion of mem and samech was extremely easy in scripts of the 3rd century through 1st century. On verse 9, Saul was plotting against him. The Hebrew Bible reads, Shaul macharish hara'ah, literally, Saul was devising evil. Kimchi and Gersonides compare macharish to the verb of the same root, chet reshin, in Proverbs 3:29, quote, do not devise, tacharosh, harm against your fellow, end quote. Septuagint reads, David learned that Saul was not keeping the evil concerning him quiet. Auld writes that the Septuagint takes macharish as a homonym, meaning keep silent, misreading the Hebrew and making the insertion of the negative necessary. On verses 11 through 12, McCarter writes that these verses are all corrupt in all witnesses, except for 4Q Samuel B, which is taken by several to be the original, and reads, quote, will the citizens of Keilah surrender me into his hand? Will Saul come down as your servant has heard? O Lord God of Israel, tell your servant. The Lord answered, he will come down. Then David said, will the men of Keilah surrender me and my men into the hand of Saul? The Lord answered, they will. End quote. Tsumura, however, writes that verses 10 to 11 constitute a unified structure, and there is no reason why one should take a shorter text always as original. In contrast, Auld gives the summary of the discoveries in the Judean desert regarding the textual situation. Quote, 4Q Samuel B here presents the fuller, uncorrupted text. Thus, in verse 11, where the Masoretic text has suffered dictography and subsequent further corruption, 4Q Samuel B stands with the Old Greek in preserving the more original reading. Also here, where Vaticanus has suffered haplography, 4Q Samuel B with the Masoretic text preserves the more original reading.
What are the actual differences? I'm not. When you translated 4Q, it didn't seem that different.
Will the citizens of Keilah surrender me into his hand? Will Saul come down as their servant has heard? O Lord God of Israel, tell your servant. The Lord answered, he will come down. Then David said, will the men of Keilah surrender me and my men? It's longer than...
That seems
verses.
identical to what's in the JPS.
And to what I just read.
Unless are you reading the Masoretic rather than the?
No, I have read the 4Q Samuel B.
Because I'm not seeing a difference.
Wait, there is a difference, but I think
so,
I copied it from
the from Qumran, and now will Saul come down as your servant has heard, and then the Masoretic says, will the men of Keilah surrender me into his hand?
Yeah, the citizens of Keilah. Here it's just the Baalei, and here it's Ve'ata. Yeah, McCarter summarizes, at the beginning of verse 11, the Masoretic text omit Ve'ata and has in its place Vayiskerenu Baalei Keilah Beyado. Will the hands of the Lord of Keilah hand me over to him? A diagraph from verse 12 incorrectly inserted at this point. 2. Vaticanus reflects a similar fragment at the beginning, but in this case, the intrusive words represent a correction, quote-unquote, made after the loss in Vaticanus of everything from the first Vayomer, Vayova, to the second in a long haplography. 3. The originality of Ve'ata, now then subordinated by Vaticanus and Lucenic recensions, and the space between space requirements of 4Q Samuel B was already recognized by Bud, etc. So there are differences.
Okay.
They seem to be comparatively small in the grander meaning of the phrase. I mean, you have the question of, basically, do I need to get the fuck out of Dodge? And the answer via divination, naphod, etc.
Yeah.
I mean, the weird thing, of course, is that he asks 2 questions and gets an answer for one, the second one, which apparently is weird. And then he asks the first question again and then gets the answer for it.
But if you ask, if you there's a form of divination where you throw the bones up, and if they both land the same way, you've got 2 sides. If they both land up, then it's a yes. If one lands up, one lands down, it's a no. Or if they cross or don't cross. So if it's a yes-no mechanism, whatever this mechanism is, then you would ask 2 questions. You could only get one answer, and then you'd have to be like, okay, well, I assume that's an answer to the second question because that was the last one I asked. First question, really need to be clear. Is that also a yes for that one? Because I need to know. That's going to be a problem. Okay, everybody pack up.
I'm wondering if there's, I don't know, the way that I think Rush was talking about it, like maybe there's other places in the Bible where you ask 2 questions and then the answer was for the first question. So
it could be. In this case, the answer is yes for both, but I could see why he'd be like,
right.
Let's clarify.
Yeah, this sort of thing reminds me of there's a practice of magicians. Usually they're like the card magicians, where it's called multiple outs. Where you provide 2 choices, and then regardless of whatever the spectator chooses, there's always another way to get back to whatever you're trying to lead. The magic trick to be, whatever, whether it's us revealing a card or something. So anyway, I just thought this is sort of like that. There can always be a different alternative that will match whatever outcome you get when you roll the dice.
Fair enough. Fair enough. I still get the feeling that this is very much a form of yes-no divination. And maybe that would be, who knows, maybe the larger ephod would have had more options. But the smaller travel one would not. I don't know.
Well, I mean, there is a tradition like that the one where everything is the same and there's no multiple stories and stuff, like the very traditional idea where there's like, oh yeah, the high priest had the Urim Tumim inside the one ephod, the only one that ever existed, and and it had the 12 stones on it, and one for each tribe, and then you could actually use the letters of the names of the tribe plus some expression, I can't remember what it was, to write, you could literally write anything, and so you could get
so
a
you
full
could spell out, so you could Ouija board it.
The letters would light up.
As opposed to flip a coin, you could
Yeah.
Ouija board it. Okay, well that's
Yeah. But
That's
but like
the
a raffle with two outcomes is also something that's mentioned with like the what's called in the
the
scapegoat.
lot. Yeah, or when the lot falls, when they're like, when the what's his name was murdered for taking stuff out of Jericho, or when Saul and Jonathan and the honey, and who has offended God by breaking the vow. The lot falls to Saul and Jonathan between them and the people. Then the lot falls to Jonathan between the two, and then yada yada yada. So it's very binary in that sense.
Okay, now in verse 13, 600 in number. According to 22:2, David had around 400 men. This led the Septuagint to correct, quote-unquote, the number to 400, a reading attested by Josephus in Antiquity 6:274. Bar-Efrat and Tsumura, however, write that the number of David's men had grown as more people joined him. And finally, verse 16, helped him find strength in God. Hebrew Bible literally reads, and he strengthened his hand in God. McCarter writes that the expression strengthen the hand generally means to encourage, especially of the fearful, as we see in Nehemiah 6:9, Job 4:3, and Ezekiel 13:22, and is used here to describe Jonathan's encouragement of his frightened friend. It also implies support in an undertaking, as we see in Judges 9:24. Tsumura notes R.P. Gordon's view that the addition of by God is unique, quote-unquote, for this expression in the Old Testament, and that, quote, David is bidden to consider the power and purpose of God, end quote. That's it for my comment on this part.
Here we go. Shall I return to the text?
Yes, please finish.
Of course. Now the Ziphites went up to Saul at Gibeah and said, is not David hiding among us in the strongholds at Horesh on the hill of Hakilah, south of Jeshimon? Yeshimon? Yeah. Now, O king, come down whenever it pleases you to do so, and we will be responsible for handing him over to the king. Saul replied, the Lord bless you for your concern for me. Go and make further preparation. Find out where David usually goes and who has seen him there. They tell me he is very crafty. Find out about all the hiding places he uses and come back to me with definite information. Then I will go with you. If he is in the area, I will track him down amongst all the clans of Judah. So they set out and went to Ziph ahead of Saul. Now, David and his men were in the desert of Maon, in the Arabah, south of Jeshimon. Saul and his men began the search, and when David was told about it, he went down to the rock and stayed in the desert of Maon. When Saul heard this, he went to the desert of Maon in pursuit of David. Saul was going along one side of the mountain, and David and his men were on the other side, hurrying to get away from Saul. As Saul and his forces were closing in on David and his men to capture them, a messenger came to Saul saying, come quickly, the Philistines are raiding the land. Then Saul broke off his pursuit of David and went to meet the Philistines. That is why they call this place Selah Hamalekot.
Hamachlekot.
Sorry.
Yeah.
More phlegm.
Or rock of separation in English.
Yes.
Or division.
Separation or
whatever you want to translate.
Or Zarahemla in Reformed Egyptian.
Oh, shut up.
And David went up from there and lived in the strongholds of En-Gedi.
Yeah, I should note that in the Hebrew Bible, it ends at verse 28, so...
Fair. fair. But I don't know. The objection to Saul having trouble fighting them in the desert, I don't know. It makes sense. I mean, how long did the Taliban hide from the American government? And they had drones. So Saul didn't have drones.
No, he had pigeons. No.
Which are just as good, honestly.
Yeah.
Well, they can't bomb your enemies, but they can crap on their heads. So
Yeah. I see a comment. Maybe Aaron wants to read it.
All right, so Ben One Eye offers, what is it,
Romanian lay.
Okay, Romanian lay, 25 Romanian lay. Thank you. Says, so if the larger ephod had more options, would those be like yes, no, maybe, I don't know? Can you repeat the question?
possibly.
That would be helpful.
I mean, that's the magic 8-ball question answers, you know. Maybe they eventually worked it into the full alphabet version and you could Ouija board it.
Okay, on verse 19, Klein notes that several scholars have proposed that the geographical notices after Choresh are a gloss from a parallel account about the Ziphites in 26 verses 1 and 3.
A gloss? No.
Yeah. Verses 23 to 24, Ma'on. Auld writes that the mention of the Ma'on desert no less than 3 times in these verses appears to be an insistent demand that the reader remain aware of the location of the action. Tsumura writes that Ma'on is identified with Tel Ma'in, about 7 miles south of Hebron, 5 miles south of Ziph, and 9 miles away from Arad. For some reason I didn't write the... never mind. Okay, on verse 26, McCarter comments, the tactical situation described here requires some explanation. David and Saul are both at the crag, Hasela, in verse 25. David and his men on one slope, Saul and his men on the other, Mitzad Hahar Miseh. Saul's troops are, quote, circling in on Otrim El, David and his men, end quote. That is, Saul is advancing toward David around the mountain from both directions in a kind of pincer movement. David, though hurrying nechpaz to get away, is trapped and cannot hold out for long.
Deus ex machina, the Philistines.
Well,
Deus ex machina originally is, I found out recently, is referring to like Greek theater with actual machines and cranes. But it was originally normally referred to divine intervention in a story because you would lower the god down with a crane. So there was the
god of the machine.
Crane.
Yeah, but I mean,
God in the crane.
It's anything that's like a little too convenient to be plausible.
Yeah. So that's been expanded from then to be like anything within the power of the author, right? But like this is actually literal, like in the original sense of like divine, interpreted as a divine intervention. There is a tradition that the message malach is an actual angel in this case.
I wanted to get to that actually. Thank you, Isaac, for ruining it to me.
You're welcome.
So it's actually my final comment on this. The Hebrew for messenger is malach. The word means either a prophet, an angel, or a messenger, as we've seen previously. Early translations and commentators took malach here as a messenger, but Rashi, based on Midrash Psalms 9:5, wrote that this was a real angel in order to save David. Yeah. And I have the Christians now. Yeah. So Bede interprets David's dwelling in the wilderness as an allegory for Christ's presence in the hearts of tested believers in an arid age.
Yeah.
What?
Like he couldn't even link it to the whole wilderness story.
Yeah, the testing in the wilderness.
No, it had to be for believers instead of
What's
Jesus.
an arid age, as in like when they're old or when they're...
Oh no, it's that this age, whatever age we are currently in, is so dry of the spirit and the faith that enlivened the totally authentic and not at all made up stories of the first age of Christianity. And it is because the faith of people has waned and we are in a spiritual desert, but thus will the true believers be known. And this is surely a sign that the end is just around the corner. That script literally is every single, you could find every decade from the earliest of Christianity to now, some asshole is pulling out that script.
Yeah, it's never the religious man's fault that he lives in a dry age.
Well, no, and it's artificial dryness. It's like the persecution that Christians in America endure. It's very, oh, somebody think of the children. You stubbed your toe, get over it.
Yeah.
Okay, I was trying to like weasel in a bit of Ben Shapiro dryness, but whatever. It didn't really work.
Please don't. Bede explains the allegorical significance of the Ziphites' words to Saul. Christ, in the person of David, dwells in the minds of those who hold firmly to the faith, while false brothers, represented by the Ziphites, aid the church's enemies.
I have to wonder how Christians don't realize that they're just shoehorning in something that was obviously never there. How do they never get that? That's all they do here.
Oh, because that's what sermons are. That's what they always have been. If you go to a church and there's a sermon, and I'm talking about a sincere church, not some, buy me a
Hippie
plane or
bullshit.
God will kill you all bullshit.
Oh,
Yeah.
the
Or
opposite.
whatever. But you'll get the minister will sit with the Bible and be inspired by some text and draw parallels and analogies from the text. And it's not to say that this is necessarily the original intention, but that this is what the Spirit is telling him through the Bible. This is
Yeah.
sermons. This is not scholarship.
Let's come back.
This is also, I think, it probably has to do with the need to fulfill prophecies, because those lists of prophecies that were fulfilled, a lot of them weren't even prophecies.
Yeah.
like the stuff in what was it, in Psalm 22? There's a Psalm 2. I forget which one it is. It's one of those.
All the stuff they used to make up the birth stories of Jesus
About, like,
weren't really prophecies.
Casting lots
about the
over his
Messiah.
clothing or whatever.
No, it was the my God, why have you forsaken me? I forget which psalm that was from. Either 2 or 22.
Wasn't that
one of
Isaiah?
those.
No.
No, it was definitely a psalm.
My favorite one is the one from, I want to say it's 2 Kings, but I could be mistaken. It's the one where it being, in one translation, it's very clearly he's being chased by dogs and hunting dogs, and these dogs are biting at his hands and feet.
Oh,
But in
Lions.
another,
Lions.
but they're biting like lions or something like that.
the
But
translation's all sorts of fucked up.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it
there's
sounds
one
like
pierced my
translation
hand.
wherein it says they pierced his hands. So it's not, suddenly the dream changes. You know how dreams change. Suddenly he's not being attacked by hunting dogs. He's not being bitten by lions or hunting dogs that are biting him like lions. Suddenly they're piercing his hands and feet, so that just that part of just that sentence is a prophecy.
Right, yeah, even though it's not, yeah. So like it's funny that they that so often you'll find things referred to as prophecies when they're not prophecies. It's like a lot of the time they're not even taking from prophetic works. So like they're taking from Psalms, for example. I'm like, if the Psalms were prophetic, they have an incredibly low hit rate.
Yeah.
I'm
And
pretty
when
sure
they're
God
actually-
has bashed some babies' heads on rocks. That
Yeah.
seems his vibe.
And when they're actually prophetic, and that prophecy gets fulfilled or somehow shows up in scripture again fulfilled, then they introduce the whole concept of double fulfillment. So it's like there's always going to be something they're going to launch their beliefs
Yeah,
towards.
either those things are fulfilled later in the same book, or then yeah, if they have that and then Jesus also fulfills it, then it's the double fulfillment.
Religious thinking is the opposite of scholarship, because you can make anything say anything. At some point, if someone wants to, I will put out the challenge. Find something, anything in history or imagination, I will justify it from scripture. Anything you want. Good, bad, real, fake, anything at all.
Mm-hmm. And you
I-
can always put your finger on some verse at random in the Bible and find some application for your life now.
Yep.
Regardless of context, regardless of whatever.
That reminds me. It reminds me so much of like astrology bullshit.
Mhm.
Like it's just not only like astrology but like tarot too. Like I know people use it for like self-reflection and stuff, and that's fine. But when it comes to thinking that there is like some secret knowledge in here, like no, you're pulling it out. That's you. That's coming out of you. not
And you can
not
use
the
it to
words.
know your own mind. That's
Sure,
great.
yeah.
That's very valuable. But yeah, it's exactly the same thought process. The problem is when you do it the scripture way, then God is really saying whatever the hell you cooked up out of your ass. And then that means you're entitled to use any force necessary to do whatever it was you decided you should do.
And finally, Ephraim writes that while David was persecuted explicitly, Christ is often persecuted secretly through impiety and heresy.
Except for the very public execution. That was
Well,
pretty
no,
public.
they're talking about the modern day where everyone was Christians, but they still need to feel persecuted. So obviously, someone privately in their own home, in their own thought process, is being impious, and it hurts Jeebus's feelings. It hurts his feelings, guys. He's so sensitive.
All right. So are we ready to move on to 24?
Yes.
All right. Thank you. All right. After Saul returned from pursuing Philistines, he was told, David is in the desert of En-Gedi. So Saul took 3,000 able young men from all Israel and set out to look for David and his men in the crags of the wild goats. He came to the sheep pens along the way. A cave was there, and Saul went in to relieve himself. Because that's what you do. Go to a
Yes.
confined space of limited oxygen. Okay. David and his men were far back in the cave. 600 dudes are far back in the cave.
It's a
And they're all
big
going,
cave.
shh, shh, shh.
Very deep.
Saul does like to plumb him some deep caves.
The men said, This is the day the Lord spoke of when he said to you, I will give your enemy into your hands for you to deal with as you wish. Then David crept up unnoticed and cut off a corner of Saul's robe. Afterward, David was conscience-stricken for having cut off a corner of his robe. He said to his men, The Lord forbid that I should do such a thing to my master. The Lord's anointed to lay my hand on him, for he is the anointed of the Lord. With these words, David sharply rebuked his men and did not allow them to attack Saul. And Saul left the cave and went his way. So, Saul is in that, I'm guessing, squat position.
It depends on who you ask.
He might have been standing. You know, they didn't say what he was relieving precisely.
There's 600 men in a cave, which are known to have really good acoustics. And
They were all there with bated breaths.
they're apparently not breathing at all. I mean, how would there even be oxygen left?
It could have been like
600 men
very
in a
far
cave.
down the cave.
Ask Ken Ham. He'll give you the answer.
Like a
And,
cave
and
system,
Saul, with 600 men hiding in a cave, Saul cannot be the first person to go into that cave to relieve himself. So there's going to be something about the oxygen in this place. It's going to be very obvious there's 600 dudes in there. But here we got this guy doing whatever he's doing, apparently not looking, and somebody comes up, sneaks. David specifically manages to weave his way through the 600 people without making a sound and cut off a bit of his robe.
Well, it doesn't actually say that 600 men were in the cave. It just says David and his men. It could have been.
Well,
like,
that
his
was like
close-
I think before. I
his
don't know if that was
guards.
the number.
There
but
was
all the
600
people went
men
and joined
following him in total, but that doesn't like
Yeah,
he definitely had a core, you know, like Jesus had his 12 disciples, but also the 70
Yeah.
people who followed him. Like he definitely would have had a core of people, and they could have been hiding in caves all throughout the system. But wouldn't
The
you know
king's
it,
guard.
Saul happened to not only not notice that they were there, but walk into the one cave where David was and occupy himself so David could sneak up behind, which was gross, and take the corner off the edge of his robe, for which he was conscience stricken, because I touched the cloth, the magic cloth, and I tore it. Oh, the shame.
Yeah,
It's more of that he could have killed him, but he knows he shouldn't.
Yeah, but he was conscience stricken over cutting the frickin' bit of cloth.
Yeah, because
I
it's
also
a
think-
symbolic thing.
How insane is it that within that same sentence, there's Saul is both the enemy and the Lord's anointed. Like
Mm-hmm.
how quickly the tables have flipped on
Yeah.
Saul.
Well, he's both. I mean, it allows Christians to have a justification for divided loyalties and for following evil instructions from a ruler, because the Lord has appointed the rulers over you and you must obey them even if they are bad.
Okay, so continuing on. Then David went out of the cave and called out to Saul, "My lord, the king." When Saul looked behind him, David bowed down and prostrated himself with his face to the ground. He said to Saul, "Why do you listen when men say David is bent on harming you? This day you have seen with your own eyes how the Lord delivered you into my hands in the cave. Some urged me to kill you, but I spared you. I said, I will not lay my hand on my Lord, because he is the Lord's anointed. See, my father took them. See, my father, look at this piece of your robe in my hand. I cut off the corner of your robe, but did not kill you. I could have killed you, but it didn't. See, that there is nothing in my hand to indicate that I am guilty of wrongdoing or rebellion. I have not wronged you. But you are hunting me to take down my life? May the Lord judge between you and me, and may the Lord avenge the wrongs you have done to me. But my hand will not touch you. As the old saying goes, the evildoers come evil deeds. So my hand will not touch you. Against whom has the king of Israel come out? Who are you pursuing? A dead dog? A flea? May the Lord be our judge and decide between us. May he consider my cause, and uphold it. May he vindicate me by delivering me from your hand. When David finished saying this, Saul asked, "Is that your voice, David, my son?" And he wept aloud. "You are more righteous than I," he said. "You have treated me well, but I have treated you badly. You have just now told me about the good you did to me. The Lord delivered me into your hands, but you did not kill me. When a man finds his enemy, he does not let him get away unharmed. May the Lord reward you well for the way you treated me today. I know that you will surely be king, and that the kingdom of Israel will be established in your hands. Now swear to me by the Lord that you will not kill off my descendants or wipe out my name from my father's family." So David gave his oath to Saul. Then Saul returned home, but David and his men went up to the stronghold.
Yeah, so not only is this, at least this last part, right? That seems very much out of Saul's character.
Yeah.
Saul has proven himself to be an absolute fucking maniac. So he was like, "Oh my God, you're nicer than me. I'm giving you the kingdom." But of course, that goes back to the cutting of the robe, right? So I want to quote here from Robert Gordon.
R.P. Gordon, yeah.
Symbolism there certainly is, if 24:4-5 is meant to be read in the light of 15:27 forward, where the tearing of a robe, whether Samuel's or Saul's, is disputed, signifies the forfeiture of his kingdom. And Samuel turned to go, and he seized the skirt of his robe and tore it. Samuel said to him, the Lord has torn the kingdom of Israel from you this day, and it will give it to your neighbor who is better than you. According to this interpretation, then, David, the neighbor in question, staked his claim to the kingdom that day in the cave when he removed a piece from Saul's robe. The narrative complementarity of the two passages is also suggested by the occurrence of the expression hem of the robe, since it is not found elsewhere in the Hebrew Bible. References to Akkadian texts from Alalak and Mari illustrate the possibility that David's was a calculated symbolic act at Engedi, since grasping the hem of a superior's cloak was a common expression of submission. It has been surmised that David's cutting of Saul's hem mounted to a declaration of revolt. Actual cutting of a garment is mentioned in the Mari text in connection with the immobilizing of a prophetess. In one letter, Badilim, the administrator of the Mari palace, informs Zimrilim that Ahum, the priest, has removed the hair and the hem of the cloak of the female ecstatic, or the prophetess. This evidently was thought to bring the prophetess under the control of the king, to whom the hair and hem was forwarded. The parallel with 1 Samuel 24 is sufficiently close for Knox to conclude that David, by cutting off the hem of the garment, does evil to Saul. So this, I bet, I sure hope, okay, is the Christian commentary, Tomer, is the Christian commentary that you have, are they by any chance going to mention the time that I think it was a woman came up to Jesus and grabbed him by the cloak? Are they going to mention that?
I mean, there are a lot of Christians in verses 1 through 7. I give you that.
I'm sure. Yeah.
Regarding the woman, I don't know. I haven't checked all the quotations.
Okay, sure. Okay, fair enough.
That's, yeah, the woman who's healed of the bleeding when he's on the way to resurrect Jairus's daughter, was it?
Whatever. She goes and just like, it's in the crowd and she just grabs his cloak.
Yeah. Who touched me? I'm totally omniscient.
No. But either way, so this story is also going to share some parallels to chapter 26 once we get there. And like it might be from a different, it might be like a different version of the same story.
Thanks for bringing that up, though. I had not noticed, and I should have noticed, the parallel between the prophetic, the tearing of the robe, and Samuel. It's possible David wouldn't necessarily have known about that. He wasn't on the scene, obviously, by when that happened. Or he might have, again, but this is a story written later, retconned in with the symbolism. The version I was given when I was young, obviously, was the very literal-minded evangelical, which is borne out by the text of, look, I proved I could have hurt you, but I didn't. See, you can match this to the robe in your hand. Clearly, I could have struck you dead from behind, and you would have been dead, and then I wouldn't have been pursued. So there's the argument to be made that it's something of a bargain, because at that point Saul has superior forces and could just kill David and his men, but he's going to look really bad if he does it right then when David.
And I have to wonder why it is that Saul, just Saul, has to go relieve himself in the cave. He's got 3,000 men.
I'm sorry, Aaron. Did you want him to not go in private? Come on now.
He's the king. He can't be having 3,000 men watching him relieve himself.
So rude, Aaron. Wow.
So what are these other 3,000 men doing?
Aaron.
Sitting in a ditch.
Yeah.
Looking the other way.
Outside going,
Yeah, looking the other way.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, I'll start on verse 2. Okay, because there is a difference between the Old Testament and the Hebrew Bible, I'm going to, when I'm saying 2, which is 3, I'm saying 2 in the Old Testament, which is 3 in the Hebrew Bible. Okay? So I'll start with 2, which is 3, crags of the wild goats. The Hebrew Bible reads, Tsurei HaYe'elim. The Ya'el refers to a mountain goat or an ibex, which still live in the cliffs near En-Gedi, according to Bar-Efrat and Klein. Tsumura notes a similar expression in an Ugaritic text from Ras ibn Chani. or even honey, quote, just as lions are in a lair, so wild goats in a rock, end quote. Vaticanus has Sadayim. Auld notes the Lucianic recension reading, the hunting ground of the deer, reflecting Tzeidat Ha'eyalim. He writes that while the Vaticanus appears to attest to a different text, the Greek words edayim and elayim look similar, i.e. delta and lambda. And so, quote, we may be dealing with the remnant of a transcription of a text similar to the Masoretic text or the text behind the Lucianic recension, end quote. Targum reads, the clefts of the rocks. Kimchi, I like this. Kimchi writes that he has no idea why it is translated as such. Like, I like it.
That is translated as wild goats, or that is
the clefts of the rocks. As...
Yeah.
I mean, I've seen desert cliff caves. Granted, the ones I saw were clay more than you should not go in there. Clay is very unstable, but I get it. It's that's definitely, there's lots of clefts, and that's how mountain goats make their way up and down things and just jagged.
Well, Van Starda and Solman writes that since Saul had nothing to do with mountain goats, the Targum assumes that he sought in the clefts of the rocks, and perhaps may have been based on Jeremiah 16:16. Vulgate combines the Targum translation with the Masoretic text, quote, the most craggy rocks which are accessible only to wild goats. On verse... sorry. What?
The most craggy.
The most craggy, yes.
Okay.
Now 3, which is 4, Saul went to relieve himself. The Hebrew Bible reads, lehasech et raglav, literally, to cover his feet. This is generally taken to be a euphemism for defecation, found also in Judges 3:24. Some traditional commentators, however, took it literally. Rabbi Elazar in Talmud Barachot 62b said, quote, this teaches that Saul covered himself with his garment like a sukkah, end quote. Kimche explains, quote, out of great modesty that was in him, he would cover himself while defecating so that no one would see his naked flesh, end quote.
This is
There
very
is this...
funny. Sorry to interrupt. This is very funny on a couple of levels. One, so yeah, it harkens back to the story of Eglon, right?
Yes.
And then so sukkah, obviously in Russian.
Yeah.
This is pretty
Yes,
funny.
yes, sukkah as in like a hut. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a hot.
Yeah.
There is disagreement if he was just defecating, as Rashi and Gassanadis explain, or just urinating, according to Kimchi and Abravanel. Klein notes McCarter's opinion that this may have been a mockery of Saul, an interpretation enhanced by the account of Ehud and Eglon, the Moabite king. However, he writes, quote, perhaps the narrator only meant to imply that Saul went into the cave alone, unattended by bodyguards, which made David's opportunity to kill him all the easier. That Saul would have the bad luck to choose the one cave where David and his men were staying is a sign of his tragic fate, and perhaps of God's guidance. David's forces may have been in the back of the cave or in one of the galleys branching off from the entrance, end quote. Septuagint reads, Saul went in to prepare himself, and Peshitta has Saul sleeping in the cave.
No, he's sleeping in a different one. There's a different one where he sleeps, where you have the same thing with the cutting of the hem of a robe, but in this case, it's grabbing the spear and the shield from by his head because his armor bearer is asleep because God magic. So that'll come later. It's basically the same thing of the, look, I got right up to you while you were vulnerable and could have killed you, but I didn't, so stop trying to murder me. Thanks. The point of that Lawrence made earlier about the potential for making a claim to the kingdom by the cutting of the robe and paralleling the prophecy of Samuel, it's interesting to think, like, hypothetically, if any of this were real, and David knew that, would he be making a bid to Saul's men as much as to Saul to, like, show his virtue and make them hesitant to follow Saul's orders to kill him?
I mean, I'm not sure how it really would have been, but I generally, I wouldn't think that simply cutting, like, the thing is, if Saul says so, sure, then they'd probably listen. But if If he just came out with like a peaceful robe and said, "I am your master now," they'd be like, "Fucking get him! We found him."
No, but far more subtle. Like, because he's holding this up, saying, "See, it matches your robe. See, I could have killed you. The Lord delivered you into my hand, because chance is always the Lord. See how much more virtuous I am, having the opportunity to kill you, not killing you, while you pursue me for no reason." This, like, to put into the minds of people that he is more virtuous, more just, more merciful than Saul, making sort of a psychological bid, if you will.
I mean, if we have learned anything from modern American politics, being more virtuous does not necessarily make you the more
actual
popular
virtue, showy virtue.
Even then, people will just go to the thing they like, and sometimes the thing they like is hatred. So
it's not clear.
That's
hate to love and love to hate.
It's not clear from the verse if, like, Saul leaves the cave and David follows him, if that interaction was like in front of other people, or if it was just them two,
the later
just
one,
outside the cave. Yeah,
it makes sense though, because if he waits for Saul to get out of immediate spear chucking range, then he might get his whole sentence out.
Now on 4, which is 5, this is the day the Lord spoke of when he said to you, etc. This command is not given previously. Abravanel, followed by Bar-Efrat, writes that it is not by accident that Saul entered the cave. Rather, it was ordained by God so that David could kill him. Likewise, Auld writes that the word Amar, quote, may not need to refer to past time, and very often does not so refer, especially with the stock introduction, Ko Amar Yehovah, thus said the Lord, where the perfect is called prophetic or even performative, end quote. Regardless, Klein writes that the silence about this oracle may indicate that chapter 24 was once transmitted independently and not as part of HDR, i.e. the history of David's rise, which is 1 Samuel 16:14 through 2 Samuel 5:10.
Yeah, and remember, we could also just have the issue of like differing traditions about the same stories. Like we kind of had that before. I forget which. The one where Saul tries to kill David. Two separate traditions of essentially the same story. And we get that the doublets all the time. So I wouldn't be surprised if this was just like another one. Well, not necessarily another one, but like a reworking of one. I'm not entirely sure. There is some debate about it, but
it's funny to think that the tradition in Hebrew of doublets, of repeating an idea 2 or 3 times with slight variation, seems to have arisen from trying to harmonize disparate accounts of the same event by having them both happen twice.
I mean, in some cases, yeah, but I think for others, like the ones that you wouldn't ever expect to happen, like some stories, I could see how having it happen twice adds to their power, but in something like the introduction of somebody, like like David was introduced multiple times, so was
3
Saul.
times.
Like you don't need to introduce someone in 2 vastly different ways.
No, you don't. But if you have 2 stories of his introduction that both have deeply held roots in different groups that you're trying to bring together, you end up repeating both stories as though they are both totally valid and just, we don't know exactly what sequence they happened in, but totally things and stuff. And then that turns into over years and years of having to do that because harmonization magic, then you end up with this literary habit of a doublet or a triplet of the same account. Like it develops over time.
Yeah. Although I because like for some of them, you could like have some kind of like some kind of apologetic to be like, oh well, they're actually part of the same narrative, or like this thing did happen twice or 3 times, but like for stuff like the introduction of somebody, I'm like, no, those were 2 different things that were patched together.
It was the same thing with Jacob's death at the end of Genesis. He died like 6 times, I swear to God. And after he's given his blessings to his son for 30 fucking minutes, then he's like, who are these kids? Ephraim and Manasseh, son of, oh no, now I have to give my blessing to them. But I didn't notice Joseph here during my 20-minute speech. it doesn't make any sense as a single coherent account. It is clearly, we have 6 different accounts. I'm going to stitch together what I can, stack what I can't, and call it a story.
Okay, on that same verse, David cut off a corner of Saul's robe. Some commentators, like Bar-Efrat and Tsumura, interpret this act as David proving that he could kill Saul, with Gersonides writing that he did intend to kill him, but did not do so out of his great kindness, quote-unquote. Auld even calls this, quote, a symbolic castration of the king, end quote. Yeah. Klein wrote that the cutting of the garment echoes 1527, where Saul tore Samuel's robe. Tsumura, however, writes that the 2 occasions are completely different, with the significance of cutting off and of tearing off the garment are not the same.
Do you think that if it said something like, well, he actually cut off his dick, then in that case, that would be like, oh, well, yeah, you can have the kingdom. That would make a lot more sense.
it will raise more questions than make sense, I guess.
I don't know how he would have, nonchalantly walked out of the cave after that, though.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, on verse 5, which is 6, David was conscience-stricken. Hebrew Bible reads, Vayach lev David, literally, and David's heart was smitten. The phrase is taken figuratively as David being conscience-stricken by McCarter and Klein. Kara explained that his heart was smitten because it degraded the king. Later on, David's heart will strike him again after the census in 2 Samuel 24:10. Auld comments, quote, just as the later counting of his people, though incited by Yahweh, is a foolish sin, so taking advantage of Saul in the cave, though offered the chance by Yahweh, is something to regret. On verse 6, which is 7, McCarter comments, Yahweh's anointed, by virtue of his endowment of divine spirit, was considered sacrosanct. To lay violent hands upon him and was thus a sacrilege, indeed a capital offense. Compare 1 Samuel 26:9, 11, 16, and 23, and 2 Samuel 1, verses 14 and 16. Sigmund Mowinckel writes, quote, behind this, of course, lie the common primitive ideas of the mana-field chief and medicine man surrounded by taboos. But in Israel, the taboos and sacred character of the king have a different basis. In ancient Israel, when a man was equipped with supernatural powers, it was thought that it was Yahweh's spirit that had come into him, had clothed himself with him, had been poured out into him, and the like, end quote. Here, and in chapter 26, David is presented as absolutely fastidious with respect to the sanctity of Yahweh's anointed. And in 2 Samuel 1, his outrage over the slaying of Saul is also absolute. The authors of the history of David's rise at every stage of its growth agree in admitting of no possibility that David was tainted by Saul's death. Is that the parrot? Yeah.
Okay, I was like, that sounds like
Nice,
a kitty
very
cat. Who is neglecting a kitty cat?
Yep, that is a parrot pretending to be a cat.
It's interesting too how, like, in Christianity, David represents so much. Jesus is like taken so much to be kind of like David.
Yes.
And so I wonder, like, this whole sentiment of like, hey, thou shalt not touch the Lord's anointed would have, like, if we had asked David, hey, what do you think about the Lord's anointed being sacrificed and killed? Like, would David have approved of that? I think he would have said no based on this.
Well, I do have
I
Augustine,
agree.
I guess.
And a couple shows ago, didn't you mention that at least some Christians, to their credit, used this story as an argument to not be anti-Semitic? Because even if you think the Jews are wrong, how dare you lay your hand on the Lord's anointed? It is not for you to, take such things into your own hands.
Isn't there like a Christian philosophy of like they've succeeded the Jews?
Oh yeah, that's the foundation of Christianity, is that we succeeded you because the tree was no longer producing figs or whatever. There's like a gazillion,
Yeah,
but you could still make the argument. Yeah, because you could still make the argument at this point in terms of the Lord's anointing, David has already superseded Saul, but David is not allowed to kill Saul. It is his great virtue that he doesn't
That's true.
strike out, and that's the only correct thing to do, is to refuse to lay your hand on the Lord's anointed, because it's up to the Lord to smite your enemies.
On verse 7, which is 8, with these words David sharply rebuked his men. Hebrew Bible reads, David tore to pieces, quote unquote, Vayishasa, his people with words. The exact meaning of Vayishasa is unclear. Some take the verb figuratively, i.e. that he tore them apart, quote unquote. Thus, Septuagint and Targum read, persuaded or calmed down. Peshitta reads, David moved his men to regret. Rashi renders, he separated and held them off with these words. Kimchi renders, he removed them with kind words. McCarter notes Bud's emendation of Vayishasa to Vayimena, restrained. He writes that while this is the true meaning of the word, it can hardly be the original reading. Auld proposed that David divided his men into rival parties. On verse 10, which is 11, some argued me to kill you. The Masoretic text reads, Ve'amar lehargecha, and he said to kill you. This reading implies that God told David to kill Saul. Some take the verb amar as referring to David's people, based on the preceding narrative. Thus, the Peshitta reads, the men with me told me to kill you. Others, like Targum, followed by Kara, Ditrani, Bar-Efrat, and Tsumura, read amar as referring to whoever said to kill Saul. Josephus, in Antiquity 6284, writes that one man spied on Saul and tried to convince David to kill him. Still others take amar to refer to David. Thus, the Septuagint reads, I was not willing to kill you. And Vulgate and Gersonides read, I thought of killing you. Some commentators, like McCarter and Klein, follow the Septuagint and amend ve'amar to ve'ema'en. On verse 12, which is 13, Tsumura comments, David calls the Lord as their judge. The expression, may the Lord judge between me and you, appears also in verse 15, and in Genesis 16:5. C.H. Gordon notes Homeric example of swearing oaths by a god. Quote, later we will fight again until a god judges between us and gives victory to one side or the other, end quote, according to Iliad 7, 377-78 and 396-97. Thus, quote, oaths were taken seriously, often because the deities would avenge false or broken oaths sworn in their names, end quote. David here, as in 26:10, leaves his vengeance to the Lord, as we see in Deuteronomy 32:35 and Psalms 94, verses 1 and 2. Like Macbeth, he thought, quote, if chance or God will have me king, then chance will crown me without my stare, end quote, Macbeth 1:3-143. But unlike Macbeth, he was firm against the temptation to help, quote unquote, God along. On verse 14, which is 15, a dead dog, a flea. Bar-Efrat notes that a dog is considered as of a lesser value, and so a dead dog is even more insignificant. The flea metaphor is even more exaggerating than that of the dead dog. Klein writes that referring to oneself as a dead dog implies self-abasement before a king, as we also see in 2 Samuel 9:8 and 16:9. McCarter notes that dog, or dead dog, is a term of self-disparagement, is found also in Akkadian letters of the Neo-Assyrian Sargonite period and in the El Amarna letters. Targum reads figuratively, quote, after one weak person, after one common man, end quote. On verse 16, which is 17, is that your voice, David, my son? Bar-Efrat writes that this question does not intend to figure out the identity of the speaker, but rather an expression of Saul's shock, who finds himself suddenly face to face in front of his enemy. Auld comments, quote, no one else in the pages of the Hebrew Bible utters Saul's first words of response, is this your voice? The terms in which Saul completes his question, my son David, are no less interesting. Two obvious remarks can be offered. He is replying in kind to David, who has addressed him as my father in verse 11, and David, after all, is his son-in-law. But it is also true, and it may be more significant, that up to this point, Saul has always used my son to refer to Jonathan, the crown prince, as we've seen 14 verses 39, 40, and 42, and 22:8, and that he will never do so again. This same Jonathan has recently described himself as the second son, 23:17. Saul and Jonathan may not be in contact with each other, but their words to David complement each other. Saul's speech begins by calling David my son for the first time. It ends by talking quite explicitly about David's becoming king over Israel. And finally, on 20 to 22, which is 21 to 23, Auld comments, Saul finally comes to his plea. Jonathan has earlier sought from David his sworn protection when Yahweh would remove all of David's enemies, as we see in 2015. And more recently, the king's son has achieved a covenanted declaration that he would be second to David, as seen in 23 verses 17 through 18. Saul now requests an oath from David that he will not institute a purge of Saul's whole house. It is a man's descendants who preserve his name. The fact that he begs David to swear not to cut off his seed or descendants gives greater credence to the suggestion that the earlier cutting of the hem of his cloak was actually perceived by Saul as a symbolic castration. The final words of his plea concern the elimination of his name from his father's house, echoing Samuel's early declaration to him in 9:20. David does so swear in verse 22a. The irony in this desperate appeal by Saul is that he himself has earlier listened to Jonathan's voice, quote-unquote, and sworn solemnly to him that David would not be put to death, as seen in 19 verses 4 through 6. He must have hoped that also in this matter, David would continue to render him good for evil. As for David, despite Saul's declarations, he takes himself and his men to the protection of the stronghold, as seen in verse 22b. And now for the Christians. Yeah. Oh.
Can you pray?
Bonus round.
Yeah. Cassiodorus writes that by hiding in a cave from Saul, David prefigured the hiddenness of the Lord's divinity in the incarnation. Jerome wrote that entering the cave, Saul prefigures the devil who discharges corruption and filth into a world of imperfect light. Yeah. Augustine writes that, following David's example, a Christian judge must punish sin lovingly, exercising the office with healing and not vengeance as the goal. Yeah. Chrysostom, wait, where is it? Yeah, Chrysostom writes that David emerged from the cave. No, sorry. In relation to Saul, he fulfills the apostolic law of honoring others above himself. He, i.e., David. And finally, Bede, where is it? Yeah, Bede writes that Saul's confession of David's righteousness, typologically understood, represents the elect Jews' confession of Christ.
The elect.
The elect. Yeah.
So I got a couple comments to read. Argspid says, by Christian apologist logic, the corner of Saul's robe refers to the SNL skit, Please Don't Cut My Testicles. Satan616 says, Aaron, that parrot is too good. I thought that came from outside my house.
You could bring the parrot on. I'm just saying. You've brought snakes and cats and dogs. There's no reason we couldn't say hello to the parrot.
He can't.
Yeah, I do want to say hi to a parrot, yeah.
He can't because it will be invisible.
Oh.
Yep. 'Tis a green parrot. Okay, so then Deviant Outcast said, could the House Bible scholars comment on the historicity of David and Saul?
So for Saul, there's basically nothing outside of these narratives. But for David, we have the Tel Dan Steel, which mentions that someone killed the king of Israel. What was it? Hold on, I actually do have it around here somewhere. Omri was for the Mesha Steel. I killed Yehoram, son of Ahab, king of Israel, and I killed Ahaziah, son of Yehoram, king of the house of David. So it mentions the house of David. So we've talked about it before, where house just means like family. So this is the family line of David, and because this is from like the 8th century or something, or the 9th century?
It is
actually?
interesting. That
But this is
using
pretty
them
old,
that
and
way.
it uses the phrase house of David. So while it's not direct evidence of David, that early on we already had people saying that they were from the house of David. And to me, that kind of I'm fine saying there was a historical David who was just a fucking warlord. Shocker,
Yeah.
another one. Like it doesn't do it's not like the destruction of atheism or anything. Like
Yeah,
you just
no.
had this king of Israel, and people later on venerated him, and they were like, this guy, this is like the guy for us. So then they would call themselves, they would say that they were from the house of David. I think that is enough to establish at least historicity. Can't really say much more other than he was just a fucking warlord. When it comes to Saul, it's jury's still out on that one. It's not entirely clear. But I could totally see Saul being a literary invention to give over or what's the word, to legitimate the kingship of David. I could totally see that.
Yeah,
I
we've
could
seen how
also
like
see. Sorry.
I was gonna say
I
we've seen
could
how like sometimes they could be confused with Samuel as well. So like if it was a real person, it'd be kind of weird for them to be
Samuel
combined.
is definitely the crux point, claimed prophet. But I could certainly see the idea of Saul superseded by David as being a way to try and bring in older traditions from two different kingdoms and try and say, oh, see, this is how we were all one family. But all of these stories are written afterwards to really build up David into this mythic figure. There's no reason to believe any of that is based in reality at all.
Yeah, like we mentioned it before, but the whole like killing Goliath thing, that was somebody else's story.
Yeah.
That was Elhanan's story first.
No,
way before.
And just because there is a bit of archaeological evidence that there was perhaps a house of David, doesn't mean that we should now automatically conclude that everything that is said about David, namely what we're reading now in the Bible, happened exactly that way.
Yeah. We're just establishing, like there was a guy who,
was the ancestor.
David or something, however you pronounce it, right? But it would, you're just another warlord in that area.
A
One of
military
many.
leader that got a lot of stories and at least claimed to something like kingship, which was then carried on by his descendants as a way of legitimizing their own rule, which is pretty typical. Although I have to say, like, you can tell that a lot of this was written way later with political things in mind. The very idea of Saul being like, oh, yes, I see now that you will rule and the kingdom will be established in your hands. Like, no, bitch. There is no way he said that. It's honestly, it reminds me most of the opera about Robert Stewart written by Donizetti when the Italians were doing like, they were really into English as like this fancy foreign thing for operas. And at the end of it, when Elizabeth has him executed but didn't want to, tried to call it back because she cries and says, oh no, James will be king now. And like, that would never have happened. Elizabeth lived forever, Elizabeth I. You clawed that crown out of her cold, dead hands and they would bite you. Even her corpse wouldn't let it go. Like, there's no way that ever came out of her mouth in any universe. It's clearly you're writing this with this, to set up the next guy really good and be like, oh, see, everyone recognized that the Lord was with him and blah, 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 blah. It's really transparent propaganda, very thin veneer.
Shall we move on to the next chapter?
Yes. And who's going to be reading this one? Mark?
Okay, sure.
So read up to including 22.
Verse 22.
This is the story of this is the story of Nabal and Abigail.
Okay. There was a man in Maon whose possessions were in Carmel. The man was very wealthy. He owned.
Wait, I think you missed one verse.
Oh, okay, gotcha. Samuel died, and all Israel gathered and made lament for him. And they buried him in Ramah, his home. David went down to the wilderness of Paran. There was a man in Maon whose possessions were in Carmel. The man was very wealthy. He owned 3,000 sheep and 1,000 goats. At the time, he was shearing his sheep in Carmel. The man's name was Nabal, and his wife's name was Abigail. The woman was intelligent and beautiful, but the man, a Calebite, was a hard man and an evildoer. David was in the wilderness when he heard that Nabal was shearing his sheep. David dispatched 10 young men, and David instructed the young men, "Go up to Carmel. When you come to Nabal, greet him in my name. Say as follows: To life, greetings to you and to your household and to all that is yours. I hear that you're now doing your shearing. As you know, your shepherds have been with us. We did not harm them, and nothing of theirs was missing all the time they were in Carmel. Ask your young men, and they will tell you. So receive these young men graciously, for we've come on a festive occasion. Please give your servants and your son David whatever you can." David's young men went and delivered this message to Nabal in the name of David. When they stopped speaking, Nabal answered David's servants, "Who is this? Who is this son of Jesse? There are many slaves nowadays who run away from their masters. Should I then take my bread and my water and the meat that I slaughtered for my own shearers and give them to the men who come from I don't know where?" Thereupon David's young men retracted their steps. And when they got back, they told him all this. And David said to his men, "Gird your swords." Each girded his own sword. David too girded his own sword. About 400 men went up after David, while 200 remained with the baggage. One of Nabal's young men told Abigail, Nabal's wife, that David had sent messengers from the wilderness to greet their master and that he had spurned them. But the men had been very friendly to us. We were not harmed, nor did we miss anything all the time that we went about with them while we were in the open. They were all a wall about us, both by night and by day, all the time that they were with them tending the flocks. So consider carefully what you should do, for harm threatens our master and all his household. He is such a nasty fellow that no one can speak to him. Abigail quickly got together 200 loaves of bread, 2 jars of wine, 5 dressed up sheep, 5 seahs of parched corn, 100 cakes of raisin, and 200 cakes of pressed figs. She loaded them on asses, and she told her young men, "Go on ahead of me, and I'll follow you." But she did not tell her husband Nabal. She was riding on the ass and going down a trail on the hill when David and his men appeared coming down toward her, and she met them. Now David had been saying, quote, "It was all for nothing that I protected that fellow's possessions in the wilderness, and that nothing he owned is missing. He has paid me back evil for good. May God do to us and more to the enemies of David, if by the light of morning I leave a single male of his."
I should note that the term for a male in the Hebrew Bible is mashtin bakir, which literally means a pisser in the wall or at the wall. Yeah, I love this.
Did one of those
What's the wall?
What's the Dutch word?
Swafflin.
Swafflin?
Wasn't one of those gross independent Baptist ministers? Maybe it was, I can't remember. Maybe it was the one who got tased, made a big deal out of this. What who pisses against the wall? That's what a real man does. Nah. Like,
I mean, there's a possible interpretation that it's referring to a dog, even one of their dogs. I won't leave standing.
Yeah, it can also refer to a dog. Yeah, we can also refer to a dog. I think kings. This phrase is found frequently, not frequently, but it is found in certain places in the Bible. Like
it would make sense if it was like another way of saying like dog, because even just saying dog was kind of what's the word I'm looking for? It was an insult, right, to be called a dog.
Yeah. I gotta wonder though, am I the only one who thinks that David's claim sounds a bit like a protection racket?
Well, I mean, he's more like the offense. I think it's more the offense that he made, the way he spoke about them.
But he walked in, he hadn't made any deal with Nabal to protect his win. He just said, I didn't hurt them.
Yeah, but I think it's more about like the way that he was so offensive in, saying like, who is he? I don't, he offended him.
Yeah. No, I just meant the phrasing of the initial request gives very lovely play, shame if something happened to it vibes.
Yeah.
Deviant Outcast offers a comment, says, we have the Folkungar, the mythic founding line of Vikings of Sweden. What would you gather?
Kings of Sweden.
What? You're right. That is what that says. Why did I say?
I mean, you kind of wish.
Yeah, a lot of countries have like.
Of course, I would say Vikings of Sweden. Why would I say king? What would you gather the possibility to be that the same goes for the house of David?
Right. So that they are. So I would say that when it says that they're, the mythic founding line of kings, we kind of have to look at other ancient Near Eastern literature to see how close it would resemble that kind of historiography. So like I haven't worked on it in a while, but I've been writing a book, and in it, like the first part I talk about is like the nature of historiography in the area, and like a lot of it was a lot of that work was mostly done by Van Setters. I'll be honest, but one of the stuff that's pointed out, or one of the stuff that I really talk about quite a bit, is the Turin canon. So it is a king's list, and the manuscript. So it has a list of kings, and it's recorded up until the Second Intermediate Period, which includes the known historical kings with very specific dates attributed to them. But along with the real kings, there are mythological ones that are mentioned as well. So Ra, Horus, and Thoth are actually listed as real kings on Earth with the very same formula of specific dates associated with them. And there's like no specific designation for them. But there's like a list of spirit kings as well in there. So you're going from like this more mythic period to a more historical one by the end of it. And like that text, and possibly like we can compare it to like Hittite historiographies and Mesopotamian ones, Greek ones as well, and they seem to converge on a very general idea of a person building their especially like a list of kings or something, building their lists from a variety of sources, and while we get closer and closer in time to when it's being written, it's more and more accurate to like an actual verifiable list of kings. But the thing is, like if they're trying to explain like the origins of tribes, they are going to use the ideologies of those tribes to build their history. So you have this mixing of myth and history, and it's not like always clear where that begins and ends.
I think it's like every naturally evolved thing. It's not a hard line, and we need to face the reality that historicity can be both yes and no. There can be a real, warlord who, there were a lot of songs and stories about, that was made into a big deal heroically, and who then was retconned to be an even bigger deal to legitimate someone else's claim to the throne. I mean, and people to get spiritual or political clout by tracing your ancestry just so to an important person. Like apparently, if you're an imam in the Middle East, you can, if you know the right people to pay, you can trace your ancestry back to the Prophet Muhammad, and then you get to wear the, I don't know if it's the black turban instead of the white one, but like there are lots of people who will trace their lineage back to a like possibly both historical and mythical character to give themselves legitimacy. So it's, you know, there can be based in something, yes. All this literally true, not a chance. Like it's neither and both.
You started this by saying that every naturally evolved line. I'll have you know, these lines were created.
Yep, the good Lord done gone. Yeah. And there it was.
There's a lot of examples of king lists or you know, the traditional ancestry of a royal family that goes back a long way, and then it's like, who are these people? We don't know. And then there's like, suddenly you get in like a mythological character or a biblical character or, you know, something very random. But a lot of these times, those are like known characters, right? These are like, oh, how do we connect our kingship to the gods? How do we connect the Irish kings to Jesus, right? Like,
how does the emperor claim to be descended from Romulus, who was totally real?
Yeah. I mean, I think Romulus and Remus is more similar in this case. It's possible that there might have been a real person who with that name, and then they've changed him into a legendary figure. And I think that's the thing. That's the same thing maybe with David, is there probably was a somebody called David who was, you know, the great grandfather of Jehoram, but you know, all of the stories and all of the things, even the fact that he was a king, could have been something that was, you know, attributed to him later on. You know, he could have just been an ancestor of that family, but not necessarily ever ruled anywhere. Or he could have just, yeah, as you say, like a leader of a city or something, maybe, possibly. But I think it's too close.
Petty bandit warlord, you know, he would have had some manner of leadership, but, you know, small petty warlords usually call themselves emperors or something very dramatic like that.
Yeah. I mean, maybe unless there's like evidence that there was a pre-existing character called David, which was then given to the royal family, like claimed him as an ancestor. It's more likely, I think, that there probably was a person who was an ancestor of the family.
I've mentioned it before, but we can remember that the Deuteronomistic history, at least partly the part that was genuinely written around or compiled around the time of Deuteronomy, was also focused on legitimating the rule of Josiah, who was fucking 12, as the puppet king for the priests who raised him, obviously. But again, 12. So divine right of kings passed down through the great ancestor David, yada, 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 is going to be, if you've already established him as of the line of David, you really need to make that look good.
Yeah, and I think what's maybe most important here is what is actually saying of David. You know, this king that assumed power. How did he go on about doing it? And he certainly didn't do it like perhaps our neighboring kings that would just like annihilate the whole royal family and then take over. But, you know, this one character actually had mercy and considered Yahweh's will and considered his being anointed and whatnot, and gave him a chance to survive. And, you know, he's very unlike every other king.
And I mean, even the kings that we have, you know, archaeological evidence for, Jehoram, Ahaziah, and I guess, you know, that would be, and they would have been at the same time as, you know, Jezebel and who was her husband's name? I don't remember. Whatever. Like, the stories about them are almost definitely like much later stories that were, you know, embellished or whatever. You know, according to the, or is it not the which stela is it that mentions Jehoram?
That's the Tel Dan still.
Tel Dan stele says that he killed them and destroyed them, but like in the Bible it says his Ahaziah's son becomes king afterwards, and there's no break or whatever. I don't know how much the Bible actually aligns with what's said in the Taldan stele. So, I guess we'll get to that.
Those were the days where everyone claimed victory no matter what had actually happened.
That's also true, right? Just because we have archaeology doesn't mean archaeology is more true necessarily.
I'm seeing one more comment from Deviant Outcast.
It's older.
Okay, so the Deviant Outcast says exactly what I'd like to see.
That's
part one.
It's a two-part one.
Yeah.
Oh, it's part. Okay. Oh. So says I'm familiar with the mythicized king list of ancient Egypt. That's what we see with the Falcons. They did live and they ruled in Sweden, but they were mythicized and added to, and that's exactly what we'd expect to see with the House of David as well.
Okay, so yeah, you just said they were mythical, so I wasn't sure. I'm not even familiar with the King's List, but yeah. Essentially, we had like a.
But you probably have Odin at the top of it.
Maybe I don't fucking know. But yeah, there's like a lot of since we got into the Deuteronomic history, things have become more and more historical, and they will continue to become more historical as we go on. So like a lot of the kings coming up, we can like verify their existence extra biblically. So the or was it? Yeah. So but either way, they still do contain, absolutely, they contain a mythologized version of a lot of these people. So like you could say that like that they existed, they did some stuff, maybe they were kings, whatever. But yeah, a whole bunch of stories added on to it. That's just how that stuff works. So yeah.
So are you saying that, I mean, you said that Ra and Thoth and all that these were actual physical historical kings?
In the Turin canon, they are listed at the very beginning as kings, and they have the exact same formula for like their reign as the actual kings that we can verify to have existed. But we know that they are not actually kings. We know that they're gods.
They're gods.
But the thing is, in such a later text, right? Was it Second Intermediate period? Because that's where the list ends. But from such a later text, like they want to again legitimate the kingship. So they would, and this pops up in more places than just one, that the kingship was handed down from the gods, usually Ra, to like the first kings, the first human kings, at least. So this is how they justify their rule in later periods.
And you can have the demigod, Romulus would claim to be, the son of a god and immortal, and Remus, twins, yada yada yada. So you can have the god legitimate your rule in several ways, including claiming ancestry from the god. Although not in the case of Israel, that doesn't really work with their canon, but it's definitely just a different form of the same thing.
I suppose I should probably ask this too. I mean, when I hear that these gods were listed down at some point as if they were physical kings, my gut reaction is to say no. Those were gods. Those were never kings. Those were never historical people. But then when we look at the Sumerian king list, I have the opposite reaction. I'm just going to readily accept that all of these people really existed. That would be the fair assumption, right?
You can proportion your belief to the evidence.
Yeah, it depends on the nature, because I'm not sure about like the Sumerian kings list, right? But it starts off with like those super long reigns, right? Those ones that are not humanly possible.
30,000 years.
Well, yeah, I'm pretty sure the reason for that is because the people who were translating it weren't reading the numbers correctly. I've read some things where there's a very subtle mark between the 60 and the 600, for example, and it would then on cuneiform, it would be easy to overlook that or misread it. So that might be what they're doing.
Maybe I'd have to look.
There also like a base 12, base 10.
Yeah,
Your
what
brain
the,
system
the, the
changed.
funny thing
60.
is that there are generations.
60,
There's
yeah.
generations of the generations. So when they have ridiculously long, like somebody ruled for 36,000 years, right? You have people with that kind of duration, and then you're like a handful of them, and then you have a next generation where there's a few kings who rule for still impossibly long times, but not that ridiculously long. So somehow or other, the whole bulk of them are measured a different way. Like maybe on a lunar calendar, instead of being 10 times something, maybe it's maybe there's 12 years in a year kind of thing.
We also have to remember the context for these things. So, like for the Sumerian kings list, I don't know what our it probably wasn't like the one that we have probably wasn't the first one. So we have to remember like when these things are being written, where these tablets were found, stuff like that. Like you need that context. Like you need to understand it in situ. So like where it's found, to like fully grasp the context of what it could possibly mean. But like I don't know that much about the Sumerian kings list, but that kind of context is very important. So something like the Turin canon, unfortunately, our copy is like heavily damaged. There's actually a really funny story about it. Well, it's actually not funny. It's kind of sad. But but essentially the guy who discovered it, like he said that he discovered it almost complete, but then like the moment he like tried to carry it, he actually carried it very poorly. He stored it very poorly, and it was just like destroyed. So very unfortunate. But the thing is,
That's
this
like
would
the
not be the
oldest
first.
document, or was for a while. It was the oldest known document, and you broke it.
Yep. That Indiana Jones is only good fictionally. Don't actually treat ancient shit like that. But
Now,
I think
subsequent to that, there have been a couple of other older documents, but they're relatively benign. There's a letter from a wife to a husband who's basically telling him don't forget to pick up rice on your way home, something like that. And then there's like the receipt for the sale of a horse, but
The
right
receipt
now
for
we're looking
stuff
at this.
was a lot easier because it was done in like a pretty methodical kind of.
But here, with the Sumerian king list, we're talking about like a concise history for a people. It's a much bigger deal.
Yeah, that's where we also have to be weary of propaganda. And it's not that it's like all whole cloth made up or something necessarily, but depending on the time you're writing and your historical context, you're gonna exaggerate something, or you're gonna like add another story or something like that. And this is just how people wrote in the ancient world. Like that's how history was done before there was like this kind of more scientific history, right, where we like analyze it all and put it together. But like the thing is, their methods for that, like myth and history, were not separate. They bled into each other all the time.
Mm-hmm. I think we've discussed this several times and in as much detail as we can, but we need to recognize that the death of faith and the birth of science comes with the enduring of uncertainty. Ultimately, we do not know how much of this is myth and how much history. That it is definitely not pure history, we can be quite certain of. That it is pure myth, we certainly cannot be certain of. There does appear to be some historicity. The truth, we don't know. We can weigh the probabilities, and people with greater expertise will do that and may do their whole lives debating over, how to weigh the balance in this. But ultimately, we just have to face the fact that we cannot be certain, and that's okay, because we don't have to think it's magic.
I have commentary. Yeah.
Go.
Yeah. Oh, by the way, Lawrence, your microphone was glitching at some point. So just wanted to let you know. Okay. So I'll start on verse 1. Samuel died. The notice of Samuel's death is irrelevant to the previous or the new story. Bar-Efrat proposed that it was brought here for a chronological reason, i.e. Samuel died, according to the author or editor, in a time span after David and Saul met at En Gedi. and before David clashed with Nabal. The note anticipates the story of the witch of Endor, which mentions his death again in 28:3. Why, however, does this note appear here? McCarter writes, perhaps we are to assume that it was at this time that Samuel died and that the notice in 28:3 is not an independent announcement, but merely a reminder included as part of the preparations for the strange story that follows. Indeed, here it is said, Vayamot Shmuel, now Samuel died, and there Veshmuel met, now Samuel was dead. On the desert of Paran, several commentators note that the desert of Paran usually designates the deserts of the Sinai Peninsula, which is far too south from Carmel, the location of the present story. Septuagint reads Ma'on, a reading favored by several commentators like McCarter, Klein, and Bar-Efrat. Auld writes that the Masoretic text suggests that David sets out for Paran, but pauses about Ma'on on the way there or the way back. He writes, however, that if it is the case, then the point could have been stated more clearly. Tsumura, however, rejects the emendation and writes that Paran being the lectio difficilo is ought to be preferred. He notes Smith's opinion that, quote, the historical improbability of David's going so far into the wilderness is not a sufficient reason for changing the text, end quote. Tsumura further writes, quote, if the stronghold, quote unquote, in 1 Samuel 24:23b is Masada in 22 verses 4 and 5, or a place near there, it would not have been difficult for David and his men to go down southward from there to the wilderness of Paran. In this case, Paran could be located in the southern end of the Arabah, as we see in Deuteronomy 33:2, Habakkuk 3:3, and Halot. On verse 3, Nabal. According to BDB Dictionary, the Hebrew word Nabal denotes, quote, foolish, senseless, especially of the man who has no perception of ethical and religious claims, and with collateral idea of ignoble, disgraceful, end quote. It is also the word for fool in the phrase, the fool has said in his heart there is no God, in Psalms 14:1 and 53:2. Kimchi notes his father Joseph's opinion that Nabal wasn't his real name, but rather a nickname which people gave him because of his behavior. This interpretation is followed by John D. Levinson, who wrote that Nabal's true name was suppressed to give him a name indicative of his character. Klein, however, notes Bart's opinion, and I couldn't find the first name, that Nabal is the man's original name, but that it had a less pejorative meaning. He suggested etymologies such as flame, scent, noble, or skilled based on cognate languages.
It's also,
so it become like Scrooge after the tale. It becomes the name for a foolish or greedy person.
No, because the actual like the letters of the word would have that meaning already. Like that makes sense. Like, they already mean like foolish, whatever. I mean, I've seen there's also an opinion about like it might be related to like Naval could be related to Nevel, which is like a musical instrument.
Yeah,
Maybe
I mean, yeah.
Maybe they just changed the vowels or something.
I think I've read about this, but I can't remember where.
Steinsaltz.
It's also Nevel as being like a sack of wine, if I remember correctly. Nevel can also mean that, which is ironic given what we will read later on, right?
Yeah. I mean, is that what you would call your son? A sack of wine? I mean, it's very descriptive.
It's what Aaron would call his snake, actually. Yeah.
Hey, you're being a real sack of wine.
Yeah.
Sack
Okay,
of
now on Calebite, the Masoretic text has Kalibi in the Kerei and Kalbo in the Ketiv. The Kerei reading, Kalbi, is usually understood to mean of the house of Caleb, according to Vulgate, Targum, and most traditional and modern commentators. McCarter notes that Caleb is a prominent and heroic figure in the conquest traditions, according to Numbers 13 and 14. Although he is called a Judite in Numbers 13:6, the Calebites were of non-Israelite origin, according to Numbers 32:12 and Joshua 14:6 and 14, later incorporated into Judah, according to Joshua 15:13. The word Kalbi can also be read as dog-like, as we see in the Septuagint and Peshitta. Josephus in Antiquity 6296 wrote that Nabal, quote, conformed his manner of life to cynic, i.e. dog-like, practice, end quote. Gersonides... Oh, I see Isaac wanted to say something.
Is that what the word cynic means?
I think it
Dog-like?
is, yes. Yeah.
Oh, that's
Yeah.
interesting.
I mean, canine, So,
Well,
Gersonides
more-
explain...
Canine is Latin, I think. Cynic is. More
Yeah,
like
but I
the
mean, I think
Greek
it's...
word for dog.
Yeah.
Like,
Gersonides explains, quote, for the most part, his cruelty was characteristic of dogs, who hate their own kind and bark at them when they come near, and will not allow to eat of anything in the house, end quote. Something like that. Tsumura notes Herzberg's opinion that due to the similarity of the Hebrew words, the narrator might have used the expression a Calebite as meaning the Calebite type, who is, quote, rough, stubborn, and thoughtless, end quote.
That's a lot of words for the man was a boor.
Well, there is another aspect to it, because the word kalbo can also be read as kelivo, or kelibo, like his heart. Auld favors this reading, noting that neither Calebite nor dog-like occur anywhere in the Hebrew Bible. But we do find kelibecha, according to your heart, in 2 Samuel 7:21, and writes, quote, the orientation of Caleb's heart is manifest in behavior that is in fact the very opposite of Yahweh's greatness, end quote. Klein notes that Levinson calls attention to the famous psalmic phrase in 14:1 and 53:1. On verse 6, long life to you. The Hebrew it's ko lechai. The word ko is generally taken to mean thus, here, and for, but the word lechai is more difficult. If read literally, it means to him who lives, a reading found in the Peshitta, Targum, and favored by Kara. However, Vorget reads, peace be to my brethren, reading leechai, a reading favored by Ditrani, Wellhausen, and Klein. Septuagint
Wait, did you say Lehi?
Leechai. Oh,
Just
that was a
Mormon
joke.
Shout out.
Ah,
Mormon
okay.
shout out.
Yeah. Septuagint reads, to good times. Rashi renders, so he will be shearing in the coming year. McCarter notes that all early translations seem to share the obscure reading of the Masoretic text, and takes the original reading to be a reference to David. On verse 8, we come at a festive time. Hebrew for festive time is Yom Tov, literally a good day, as we see in early translations, and denotes a time of feasting, as we see in Esther 8:17, 9 verses 19 and 22, and Zechariah 8:19. Although Rashi wrote that this was the eve of Rosh Hashanah, Kimchi wrote that this was a feast day done for the shearers. Kimchi's interpretation is favored by most traditional and modern commentators. On verse 9, then they waited. In Hebrew, vayanuchu, and they rested, literally. Targum reads, and they ceased, i.e. they ceased from speaking. This reading is favored by most traditional commentators and Bar-Efrat, but Kimchi writes that they could have rested from their long journey. Septuagint reads, and he leaped up, reading vayivchatz. McCarter supports this reading based on 4 Samuel B on 2034. He notes that in both places, Septuagint has, and he sprang up, which corresponds to Vayivchatz in the 4 Samuel B passage. He writes that Vayivchatz was changed to Vayanuchu by altering the pei to nun and altering the final tzadik to vav, tzadik suffix, with the two being, quote, the most easily confused letter forms in the scripts in which the biblical manuscripts were transmitted, end quote. While this reading is favored by Klein, Tsumura writes that this reading assumes that the subject switches here instead of in verse 10. Vorget reads, they held their peace, and Peshitta omits this phrase. On verse 14, he hurled insults at them. In Hebrew, it's vayat bahem. The verb ya'at is a hapax, and its exact meaning is unclear. Traditional commentators and Bar-Efrat derive it from the word ait, which means eagle, i.e. he answered them ferociously like an eagle who pounces on its prey. Septuagint reads, he turned away from them, reading vayat mehem. This reading is favored by McCarter, Klein, and Tsumura. Vogt has he rejected them, Peshitta has he was unwilling to receive them, and Targum he loathed them. On verses 18 to 20, Auld comments, speed seems characteristic of Abigail, 4 times out of 13 times in 1st and 2nd Samuel. It is not a general characteristic of biblical women, but Abigail's bustling is matched by Rebekah in Genesis 27 and by Samson's mother in Judges 13:10. Since she is already hurrying, her order to her staff to pass on before her in verse 19 adds to the impression of speed. The rations that Abigail prepares in verse 18 have elements in common with those sent by Jesse to King Saul in 1620. Bread, wine, and a kid, and those used to revive the Egyptian slave, 30 verses 11 and 12. Bread, water, figs, and raisins. But quite the closest parallel is Ziba's provision for the fleeing David in 2 Samuel 16:1. The accounts share 2 asses, 200 loaves, and 100 bunches of raisins. In addition, Abigail brings 2 skins of wine, not 1, 5 prepared sheep, 5 measures of parched grain, and 200 cakes of figs. Ziba adds 100. Sorry?
You said ship.
Sheep, yeah.
Sheep.
Oh, fuck
Not
off.
ship.
Fuck off.
Yeah, there's a little subtle thing in your accent, Tomir. Got to be careful about that. Earlier, you said, "I'm sure you meant to say feasting," but I heard a celebration of fisting.
Yeah. Feasting.
Okay.
Sheep.
Actually, have we read that far? Because I don't feel like we've read that far into what Abigail does.
No, we've read until 22.
I mean, I also
so-
had someone saying something like in situ
Okay.
instead of situ.
In situ. Yeah,
Oh,
I don't
whatever.
care. Okay, I'll continue. Ziba adds 100 of summer fruit. Abigail's asses are more heavily laden, but Ziba's are intended as royal mounts. Immediately afterward, 16 verses 7 and 8, Shimei hounds David as the man of bloods and the man of Belial, or no good. On verse 22, the enemies of David. The word for enemies, le'oivei, is missing from the Septuagint. Likewise, Kimchi and Ibn Kaspi take the enemies of David to be a nickname for David. McCarter takes the enemies to be an expansion as a deliberate attempt to distort the original meaning. A scribe changed David's words to protect him or his descendants from the consequences of the oath. Bar-Efrat, however, writes that the self-curse, in the case of an oath-breaking, is directed towards the swearer himself. But because of the belief that the curse might be fulfilled, the word enemies was added. Tsumura writes that this is an example of euphemistic addition, quote-unquote, which also appears in 2 Samuel 12:14 and is common in the ancient Near East. And finally, male, Hebrew Bible is mashtin bakil, one who pees against a wall. This reading is found in the Septuagint and Vulgate. Several traditional commentators like Kimchi, Ibn Kaspi, and Ditrani wrote that this refers to dogs, i.e. David will also kill his dogs who tend to urinate against the wall. Gersonides wrote that this refers to a single male. McCarter notes that this stereotype formula, quote-unquote, always refers to the extermination of the male members of a family, as we see in 1 Kings 14:10, 16:11, 21:21, and 2 Kings 9:8. Klein notes Viola's opinion that all these vulgar references are ascribed to various Deuteronomistic hands. Targum reads, "To him that knows knowledge." Van Staldine Salman writes that the phrase is turned into a euphemism, since the verb to know, yada, also means to sleep with or have intercourse with, and so might be a euphemism for adult males. Rashi, however, interprets one who sets the walls of his heart. That's it.
Of his heart. Reach more.
Wait, I think Rashi is explaining Targum. Targum says a man of intelligence, and he means how. And so Rashi's explaining how did he get that? Oh, he sets the walls of his heart.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, but he also says another explanation is even a dog whose manner is to urinate against the wall.
Yeah. So he's like, Yes, he's giving two opinions. One saying it means a person of wisdom, which maybe that's Targum means a man, and or another explanation it's referring to a dog. So I don't think he's not creating his own spin. He's trying to explain why the Targum translates it as intelligent person. Doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, I'm done in this section.
Yep.
Oh, there's no Christians?
There will be in the end.
Oh, right. We're not finished the chapter. Okay.
Yeah.
Who's
All
reading
right.
the next bit?
Yes.
So picking up on verse 23. When Abigail saw David, she got down quickly from her donkey, threw herself down before David, and bowed down to the ground. Falling at his feet, she said, "My lord, I accept all the guilt, but please let your female servant speak with my lord. Please listen to the words of your servant. My lord should not pay attention to this wicked man, Nabal. He simply lives up to his name. His name means fool, and he's indeed foolish. But I, your servant, did not see the servants my lord sent. Now, my lord, as surely as the Lord lives, and as surely as you live, it is the Lord who has kept you from shedding blood and taking matters into your own hands. Now, may your enemies and those who seek to harm my lord be like Nabal. Now let this present that your servant has brought to my lord be given to the servants who follow my lord. Please forgive the sin of your servant, for the Lord will certainly establish the house of my Lord, because my Lord fights the battles with the Lord. May no evil be found in you all your days. When someone sets out to chase you and to take your life, the life of my Lord will be wrapped securely in the bag of the living by the Lord your God. But he will sling away the lives of your enemies from the sling's pocket. The Lord will do for my Lord everything that he promised you, and he will make you a leader over Israel. Your conscience will not be overwhelmed with guilt for having poured out innocent blood and for having taken matters into your own hands. When the Lord has granted my Lord success, please remember your servant." And David said to Abigail, "Praise the Lord, the God of Israel, who has sent you this day to meet me. Praise be your God, your good judgment. May you yourself be rewarded for having prevented me this day from shedding blood and taking matters into my own hands. Otherwise, as surely as the Lord, the God of Israel, lives, he who has prevented me from harming you, if you had not come so quickly to meet me, by morning's light, not even one male belonging to Nabal would have remained alive." Then David took. Sorry?
Again, the picture at the wall is still here. Yeah.
Then David took from her hand what she had brought to him. He said to her, "Go back to your home in peace. Be assured that I've listened to you and responded favorably." When Abigail went back to Nabal, he was holding a banquet in his house like that of the king. Nabal was having a good time and he was very intoxicated. She told him absolutely nothing until the morning's light. In the morning, when Nabal was sober, his wife told him about these matters. He had a stroke and was paralyzed. After 10 days, the Lord struck Nabal down and he died. When David heard that Nabal had died, he said, "Praise be the Lord who has vindicated me and avenged the insult that I suffered from Nabal. The Lord has kept his servant from doing evil, and he has repaid Nabal for his evil deeds." Then David sent word to Abigail and asked her to become his wife. So the servants of David went to Abigail at Carmel and said to her, "David has sent us to you to bring you back to be his wife." She arose, bowed her face toward the ground, and said, "Your female servant, like a lowly servant, will wash the feet of the servants of my Lord." Then Abigail quickly went and mounted her donkey with 5 of her female servants accompanying her. She followed David's messengers and became his wife. David had also married Ahinoam from Jezreel. The two of them became his wives. Now Saul had given his daughter Michal, David's wife, to Paltiel, son of Laish, who was from Galim.
I'm having some trouble understanding this. I mean, so we got 5 ladies riding a donkey.
Not that
Well,
kind
one
of.
would
They were
presume
probably
they.
walking with her.
Yeah, she had an entourage. I do love how she takes a bunch of her husband's stuff, gives it to this man who's been demanding stuff, meets him, obviously makes a good impression, and wouldn't you know it, a week later Nabal's dead. I'd love to see the toxicology report on that autopsy. He just died so suddenly.
Yeah, this story reminds me of like a few other ones, but like not quite exactly the same. Maybe I'm forgetting some other story, but like when we first have this like help from this woman Abigail, it kind of is reminding me of when they go into was it Jericho, where someone lived, who was the Rahab.
Yeah, that was
Rahab,
Jericho.
sorry, yeah. So like you get help from someone, and then there's like this kind of plea with the king, right? So, or what at that time it wouldn't have been the king, but still the guy that's tearing apart the land. So like in that one we have like, hey, can you make sure like my line is safe and all that? And then in this one, she's all like, oh my god, you're gonna be such a great king and all that. So that was kind of the first thing that popped into my mind. It's not like a direct parallel, but it did kind of remind me of it.
And it's not the only time where David takes some other dude's wife.
That too.
After he mysteriously dies.
Abigail is also mentioned in like a list of like the prophetesses of in the Talmud or whatnot, like as one of the great prophetesses. Like she was actually prophesying when she was speaking to David or something like that. Like, but they
oh God,
yeah.
no! There's a story about her having her, period in the in the Talmud.
Oh,
Megillah
I'm sorry,
14a.
Homer. Do periods make you uncomfortable?
Yes.
Wow.
What's the story about?
Her period.
Wait a minute. Do you want me to check?
Obviously, but
Obviously,
yeah. You're into that, aren't you? Okay. It's Talmud Megillah. Yeah, there is a king through everything. Yeah. Okay. Where is it? It's Talmud Megillah 14a. Where is it? Where is it? Oh yeah. Abigail was a prophetess, as it is written, and it was so. She rode on a donkey and came down to the covenant of the mountain. The Gemara asks, why does it say by the covert beseter of the mountain? It should have said from the mountain. Rabbah Bar Shmuel said, Abigail, on account of menstrual blood that comes from the hidden parts, she took a blood-stained cloth and showed it to him, asking him on the rule of his status. He said to her, is blood shown at night? She said to him, are cases of capital law tried at night? David said to her, is a rebel against the throne?
Oh, it's like a one of these. It's like a.
This is a
bit.
bit.
What's the name?
I've seen
Yeah,
this
it's
in like
like
Seinfeld.
Yeah.
No, it's like a what's it called again? Like in Greek mythology when you have like the hero meets the Sphinx or whatever. It's like riddles, right? You have to talking in riddles. It's interesting.
He doesn't understand what kind of blood it is initially.
Yeah, I mean these are very rhetorical questions, right? They kind of seem to. It's like a know you kind of thing, but like everyone is saying know you.
She basically asked him about law regarding menstrual blood.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Just testing
Okay.
him. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, okay. So I'll come back to my commentary on verse 24. Pardon your servant, my Lord. The Hebrew Bible reads, let the blame or guilt, aven, be mine, my Lord. McCarter compares this reading with 2 Samuel 14:9, where a petition in a similar context is longer. Quote, let the guilt be upon me, alai, my Lord the king, and upon my father's house. Let the king and his throne be innocent, end quote. He writes, quote, in both cases, the meaning is simply, let any burden of blame that might arise from our conversation rest upon me and not you. This is the polite way of initiating a conversation with a superior. The expression is most often used elliptically as be Adoni. Let it, i.e. the possible burden of guilt, be mine, my lord. Note especially that this reference to guilt has nothing to do with Nabal's misbehavior or David's danger of blood guilt, verse 26, as unanimously supposed by the commentaries. Instead, it is simply a part of the conventions of courteous and respectful behavior, end quote. Auld writes that the repeated use of my lord seems to work at three different levels. 1, it reinforces the intensity of her supplication. 2, it helps to bring about a relationship between them. And 3, within the whole narrative, it functions to redirect our attention away from Saul and towards David as the natural recipient of the address Lord. On verse 25, his name means fool, and folly goes with him. The Hebrew Bible reads, Naval shmo venevala imo. His name means foolish, naval, and foolishness, nevala, is with him. The play on the words naval and nevala is also apparent in Isaiah 32:6, ki naval nevala yedaber.
And while we're on the word fool, if anyone tells you that Psalm 14:1 or the parallel passage to that in like Psalm 52 or 53 is about atheists, it's not. Aaron and I did a video on that, and hopefully I'm gonna finish like my academic version of that argument, because it's not like a new argument that I'm making. Like basically all scholars are like, no, this is not talking about atheists. First of all, who the fuck was an atheist in the ancient world? Basically nobody. There'd be no purpose in writing that. But yeah, while we're on fools there, that's not what it means.
Wasn't it more like those who consider Yahweh to be irrelevant?
Yeah, kind of. Basically,
Something of the
people.
sort.
It also like included people who said that they believed and did like all the they did like the rituals and whatnot, right? But they like in their daily lives were not, God fearing. It's synonymous with the wicked and the rest of Psalms. It's the same group of people.
Fair enough.
Okay, now on verse 26, McCarter writes that this verse is clearly out of place, since it assumes that David has already been restrained from assaulting Nabal personally, and that Nabal has already met his downfall. He writes that verse 26 fits well between verses 41 and 42. He speculates that it was misplaced from there because Abigail is addressing David directly, though he is not present. Klein, however, prefers Viola's solution, that this verse stems from the hand of the Deuteronomistic historian, as well as verses 21 to 22, 23b, 24b through 25, 28 to 34, and 39a. As the historian added his interpretation, he inadvertently created the chronological problems of verse 26. Tsumura, however, writes, Abigail was probably observing his reaction to her presence and could tell he was inclining towards restraint. Also, taking his agreement for granted is a good rhetorical ploy. The reference to Nabal can be taken either as a prophecy of his death or as just a curse of folly upon David's enemies. If she says God has kept David from bloodshed, it would be rather difficult for him to keep on with his intention. On verse 29, the life of my Lord will be bound securely in the bundle of the living by the Lord your God. Hebrew for bundle of the living is tzro hachayim. McCarter notes to Sinai's observation that Tzror here and in Job 14:17 refers to a tied document and renders Tzror HaChaim as document of the living. He writes that this is the equivalent of the Book of the Living, Sefer HaChaim, in Psalms 69:29, which is 28 in the Old Testament, the heavenly book in which all living people are recorded. Exclusion from the book means death, as we see in Exodus 32, verses 32 and 33. On the other hand, Tsumura notes R.P. Gordon's view that David's life is, quote, kept as securely as the tally stones in the shepherd's bag, end quote. Tsumura writes that this explanation, quote, would neatly contrast David's life with the lives of David's enemies, which the Lord would swing away like sling stones, end quote. He writes, however, that to Sinai's view seems preferable, since the meaning of the bundle or bag of the living is yet to be clarified etymologically by earlier cognates. And I've added a very interesting bit about, I've added something very interesting. Targum reads, "May the soul of my Lord be stored in the storehouse of eternal life before the Lord your God." Van Stardijn Solomon notes that in the Qumran Thanksgiving Scroll, 1QHA, the author thanks God for his protection from his enemies, stating, quote, "You put me in the bundle of the living and have protected me from all the traps of the pit," end quote. 10 sections 20 to 21. However, in the 1st century BCE, the bundle of the living became the equivalent of the storehouse, in which the souls of the righteous were kept after their death. According to rabbinic literature, the souls of the righteous will be kept in a storehouse under God's throne, while the souls of the wicked will be slung away and have no rest. According to Talmud Shabbat 152b, Talmud Chagiga 12b, and Genesis Rabbah 96.5, etc. This view is expressed by several traditional commentators like Kimchi, Gersanadis, and Abravanel, who take the bundle of the living to be the world to come, Ha'olam Haba. Another opinion, found in Numbers Rabbah 11.5, is that the verse refers to terrestrial life, i.e. David will be saved from death, but not his enemies. Likewise, Ibn Kaspi takes the phrase as referring to this world, Ha'olam Hazeh.
I could totally see that being the idea that, like, you know, once everyone or once, you know, people die, they're kind of, you know, stored away for a while. At least if you're Jewish, you're stored away for a while until the that new world, because that is the idea of, like, the day of judgment within the Old Testament, at least. That, you know, people will die, and then eventually there's going to be a judgment day, and that's when everyone rises back up, and they can have this new heaven and this new earth kind of thing. So I could totally see where that came from.
Yeah. And then
Jehovah's
the
Witnesses
confusion.
still believe something similar with, you know, you don't have an immortal soul that just exists in heaven. You're stored in Jehovah's memory, and then he brings you back. Although it is funny to think of him putting all the souls of the righteous in a chest under his throne, like a kid putting their toys away in the box at the end of their bed.
Yeah, I think that there is a conflation that happens eventually where it's like, you know, is the world to come the end of days, bringing back to life, or is the world to come where you go when you die?
Mm-hmm.
Well, from the when we did our reading of it on Atheist Sunday School, it very much seemed like it was the world to come, that things would be reborn here on Earth, but, like, God's in charge now, like, everything's gonna be, you know, a hunky-dory.
That's the earlier idea, and then the idea of, like, when you die, you go to a good place or a bad place, depending on how you were. Like, must be a later idea. I mean,
that was an idea that was taken from the HaTanach Knox, I think, from the Vestas of Zarathustra, where the original way that they put it was that the righteous man will upon his death ascend into the kingdom of justice and truth under the wise Lord Ahura Mazda. But the
right?
Yeah, the evil man will upon his death descend into the kingdom of the lie, ruled by Ahriman the opposer, which of course translates into the Satan.
The thing is, I would say that that's still pretty different from the Old Testament theology of it, because like
definitely, yeah, because the Old Testament
Yeah.
is more like Hades.
Yeah,
Yeah,
just
closer,
go when you die, you go to the Sheol, the grave. You might be like underground somewhere and whatever, and then like the end of days, the world to come, your bodies come back up and roll around and whatnot, and then
Yeah, see, I
revive.
thought this was interesting because I've read that Zoroastrianism contributed more to the formation of Judaism than any other foreign influence, but at the same time, the Jewish notion of the land of the dead is essentially the same as the Greek Hades. But while Christianity was obviously is an adaptation of Judaism, but heavily influenced by Greek religion, strangely, their version of heaven or their version of the land of the dead is not the Greek version. Their version of the land of the dead is the Zoroastrian version, which the Jews didn't adopt.
It does get a little different. So I know that in I wish Kip was here for this. There's at least one part in the Qumran scrolls, at least one text that says that there's a what was it? So it was something like a lake of fire or something like that. Like so, even in Qumran, like there's stuff about like
Yeah, I've already noted the Thanksgiving scroll.
I'm not sure if that was the.
I think the Pharisees were already developing these ideas, and I've always seen Christianity as being an offshoot of Pharisees, not any other group.
Yeah,
it would have been like
a lot of Pharisees' phrases and attribute them to Jesus while trying to set them up as
but it would also be like in many ways anti-Pharisaic, right? So the
I wonder if that developed afterwards, though. Once the Pharisees became against Christianity and developed their own ideas and in opposition to Christianity.
Basically, they stole all the Pharisees' ideas and then tried to demonize them. That's what Christianity did.
Although I think some of these concepts continue on developing too.
Yeah, Judaism still has. I mean, the different sects of Judaism still do have different ideas about afterlife and stuff like that. Like there are even that hell as a concept, like Gehenna, like people use that word to refer to a sort of punishment, but sometimes it's like, oh, the real evil don't go to hell, the real evil are destroyed, and
I mean there is
it's like a punishment period that is a maximum of 12 months, and there's a cold hell and a hot hell, and there's all different opinions like that. So it's
the kafakela described here is, according to the Zohar, the worst punishment you could get.
Yeah,
just your soul slink back and forth.
Yeah, which is probably based on this line that we just had, right, where the righteous are kept in the bag, and the evil are thrown about with a slingshot. So yeah.
And also I should note that nefesh adonit tzura b'tzorah chaim there is a Jewish phrase, tehi nishmato tzura b'tzorah chaim, may his soul be bound up in the bundle of life, which is used frequently to remember dead people, or like you see it in graves, especially tentzaba in abbreviation.
Yeah, so it's not referring to being kept alive. They don't use it to mean referring to being kept alive. It means being like put in the good book sort of thing.
Yeah,
and
in the book of life or something. But the so on what Aaron was saying, when it comes to like tracking the history of these developments, like that's why we have to be like super nuanced about like exactly when we're talking about the exact places, the context of this stuff, because otherwise like if you just have this basic idea of, well, Christianity is just Hellenized Judaism, while that is generally true, like you can't take it, like you can't what's the word I'm looking for, you can't go from the general to the specific, because these ideas did develop separately for different reasons, and then they changed over time, and the history is far more complicated, right? Because you have so many working parts, and that doesn't just go for like theology or religion or anything. That goes for actually like any topic. Like even like entirely secular ones, like it's far more complicated than people usually make it seem.
It's
There's
always
a way
more
to explain
complicated.
things. There's a way to phrase things so that you can have a basic understanding of a basic concept. But we know that the more you learn about it, the more complex it is, and the more deceptive that line can be. But it doesn't make any sense to try to explain to the novice what the depth is. It's better to get the basic concept what you can use with this phrase, like when we say that in evolution, for example, certain things evolved to perform a particular function. This is a helpful way to get people to understand like the basic premise, but we understand that it doesn't actually evolve for that function. There's no intent there. But
Mhm.
like anything else, as Lawrence is getting into, the more you study anything, the more complex it is, and then there's a deeper understanding in which what's true at the basic level is not true at the advanced level.
Mhm. And that's an important thing to keep in mind. I've tried to some degree walk the line between, it just presenting something in a comprehensible way, which is why I still use, Wellhausen and documentary hypothesis in the Pentateuch. I know it's more complicated, but literally we could spend a year on every verse if we wanted to get into every conceivable nuance, and that's just not feasible. Unless we all turn into vampires and decide to devote our immortal lives to this.
You know what? There were people in high school who thought I was a vampire. So
I'm
I'm almost there.
pale, but
I could see that.
You sleep in a
mental blood
casket?
recently, so
I mean, yeah, but not anymore. It's been a while.
Yeah, when I met Lawrence was like a decade or more ago.
Yeah, it was almost a decade ago. I think I was 21.
He was basically a kid.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I don't know. I'm not going to go into the impressions. I thought you were doing very well for yourself at that time.
Yeah. See,
Anyway.
and now looking back, I'm thinking like, man, I didn't know jack shit. So.
But this is what I wanted that reminded me. You said you're working on a book right now.
Yeah. I haven't worked on it in a while because I've just had so many things.
No,
on the plate,
I get it. I'm supposed to be working on a third book as well, but the problem that you have is that as you've seen with the latest video that you've been working on, the scripts that you work, the work that you put into the research that you do, when your big important book comes out, people are going to look up your first book too.
True. And that book was trash. It was so bad. It was awful. I wish I never printed that thing. It was really bad. Like it was like very generic, like outlines of like very common arguments for God, and then really not that well thought out like debunkings of them. So while usually it usually works for
so many arguments for God are so bloody repetitive.
I know,
like,
I know.
But what if we put pink lipstick on this pig instead of red? It's the same fucking argument. It's just stupid at some point.
No, I totally get it. But the no, it was so while I'm sure if I went back and read it, I'm sure I would still agree with many of the points I made. I would say like, man, this was not like I didn't demonstrate this well. I didn't really, cite people very well. As in like, I instead of like citing like the actual work that they did, I would cite paraphrases of the work, and like I didn't go as hard as I should have. But for the stuff I'm doing now, it's kind of to make up for that, for how awful I was in this. I'm like, I don't know if I'm overcompensating or whatever. I'm overcorrecting. That's what I'm doing.
I think we all forgive you, Lawrence. We forgive you.
Yeah. So I'm overcorrecting in the stuff that I do now because I'm like, I need everything to be super specific. I want to find as many primary sources as I can, especially to reconstruct history. And I want to be able to understand them in their different contexts. And I want to be as nuanced as possible, but I also want it to be understandable to the general public, which is a very fine. What's the word I'm looking for? It's not a fine line. What's the fucking what's the thing? The
It's
that
a
people walk on?
narrow tightrope to walk.
Tightrope. Thank you. Okay. Yeah. So like it is a tough tightrope to walk, because like I don't think I do it most of the time, but I try at least.
All right, so I got a couple comments to read real quick. Mike Jones says, "Thank you. Now that we have a grasp on modern tech and we know that a woman can have twins by two different fathers sharing the same womb, would that describe the two nations?"
What two nations?
I think this is
Well, that was
part
a
of the
half hour ago that
conversation.
the question was
Israel and
posed. so I'm-
Judah?
Okay.
I don't know.
Which is interesting though, because the Talmud talks about the twins possibly having two different fathers. So as far as I remember,
Of course it does.
which is
But
which is
Jacob
why
and Esau were very different and were said to strive in their mother's womb, and yet two nations are fighting within you, you know.
Mm,
Although they presumably did still have one father.
yeah, I'm not sure what
and
the
then
what the context
Jupiter
is.
Quake. I'm sorry, Isaac. I didn't mean to step on your lines there.
Oh, I was
Were
finished.
you? Okay, thank you. Jupiter Quake offers $20. Thank you, and says, "I saw the show Salem. I saw the show Salem that Hell's Fire is actually boiling tar. Any works of fiction that also mention this?"
I don't know about tar, but there is like, the famous, like the Talmud says that Jesus is boiling in in excrement. Like
Well, not.
There is
yeah. I'm not saying that the Talmud actually does say that about Jesus. It says a Jesus, and Christians in the Middle Ages were so offended by that
Jesus?
they
Yeah.
Well,
I mean, Yeshua is a common name, right?
yeah, it's a common
Yeah.
name, and like there are similarities between the Jesus in that story because he's like a magician, and like there's like the ones about like I'm gonna say Jesus, but I'm referring to somebody called Yeshua, the same name. He goes to Egypt, he learns magic, he goes to the temple, or maybe it's a different story where he goes to the temple, and when they say God's name, everyone forgets, right? So what he does is he hears God's name and he like carves it into his foot, and then he leaves the temple and he's able to read God's name on his foot, and then he can say it and it makes him fly, and like is it similar to Jesus in
No, but it's
of the New
certainly similar
Testament?
to Lilith. I mean, the Talmudic legend that if she knew God's true name, and so that gave her the
That's a common
ability to
trope, yeah.
fly.
That's
Yeah.
weird,
But the stealing of God's name and using it of power, yeah, totally Lilith. But in some of the tales about Jesus, there is hints that are somewhat similar.
Maybe.
I not the canonical stuff, the non-canonical stuff. There's
Yeah, and I think there's also the thing is there's like one story where he's like living like 150 years before Jesus, because he's like a student of Rab Meir, and Rab Meir lived like a long time before before the destruction of Second Temple, for example, and he asks him questions which are very like like I can't remember. I'm sure I can find like all of the quotes of the different Jesus in the Talmud, and some of them are more similar to the Christian Jesus than others. But Christians who knew about the Talmud in the medieval times were still felt that it was referring to their Jesus, and that they actually were censoring Jewish.
They kind of think that every ancient document refers some way to their Jesus.
Yeah, but they actually censored those bits, and for like a few hundred years, it was like you couldn't print a Talmud with those pages because they were offensive to Christians, and it was only like until like the 20th century that they were able to put it back in.
Although I would say
given-
on where the whole like the imagery of it, I'm not sure about the tar, but in at least the Apocalypse of Peter, we get a pretty detailed view of the of hell, and it's like it describes lakes and bogs of fire and stuff like that, and like people hanging from their tongues or their hair or something like that, their genitals sometimes. A lot of crazy stuff in the Apocalypse of Peter.
Yeah, I believe it was likely a source text for Dante's Inferno, which
That
is
and the Apocalypse of Paul as well.
of Paul. Yeah, both of those. But I mean, Dante. You want some fiction on hell? Dante has many different layers of hell, and some of them are frozen. I mean, that's
I have to
a horrible
wonder, did
statement.
Dante realize that he was writing Christian theology?
No, he
Probably
was
not.
writing "fuck you" to the Pope. Like
yeah.
from that day to Kendrick Lamar, having Bloods and Crips dance on Drake's grave for Juneteenth, there has never been such epic ponage of anyone.
Okay, I have commentary still. Yeah. Okay, on verses 32 to 35, Auld comments, David repays Abigail in kind. Her words and actions and Yahweh's words and actions are also convergent. He blesses Yahweh for sending her to him in words, Baruch Yehovah Asher, that anticipate Hiram in 1 Kings 5:21, which is 7 in the Old Testament, Solomon, 1 Kings 8:15, and the Queen of Sheba in 1 Kings 10:9. David blesses Abigail for restraining him, declaring on Yahweh's life that, if she had not held him back and met him, he would have killed every single male. That's my addition, because this phrase is not there. Hold back, Mana in verse 34, and restrain, Kala in verse 33, are practically synonymous. Sorry. If there is a distinction, it is that in most parts of the Hebrew Bible, Yahweh is quite the commonest subject of Mana. Similarly, it is always Yahweh in the books of Kings who, through a prophet, threatens every piercer in the wall, quote unquote. However, here in
I just want to start referring to people just, with the word where somebody would say dudes or blokes or guys, whatever, just pissers on the wall. That's how I'm gonna refer to people now that way.
You should. However, here in verse 34, David utters the threat of his own initiative. With David and Abigail each sharing divine characteristics, the emerging relationship could be said to be made in heaven, quote unquote. On verse 37, when Nabal was sober, Hebrew Bible reads, when the wine left from Nabal. Several commentators like Klein and Auld see this as a pun, since the word nevel means wineskin. Thus, as R.P. Gordon writes, Nabal is treated as a wineskin whose wine is poured out.
Probably had something to do with pissing against a wall.
Yeah. On his heart failed him, and he became like a stone. The Hebrew Bible reads, and his heart died inside him, and he was like a stone. Bar-Efrat writes that Nabal, who woke up from being sober and hearing all that had happened at night, was so frightened that he suffered a stroke. He notes that in antiquity, the heart was assigned functions that belonged to the brain, as we see in Genesis 6:5, Exodus 31:6, and Deuteronomy 28. The paralysis, which originates in the brain, is perceived as the heart's death. Likewise, Tsumura writes that Nabal probably had a stroke due to brain hemorrhage, rather than a heart attack, a view which explains the phrase, he became a stone, better. Kimchi, however, wrote that Nabal was silent, as if he was dead, because he was upset over the gift presented to David. Auld notes that the expression, his heart died within him, following so soon after the merriness of his heart, in verse 36, usefully reminds us that Nabal does have a heart, reading Kilevo in verse 3. On verse 38, 10 days later, and I really like Rashi here, he writes, there were 7 days of mourning for Samuel, as the Holy One, blessed is he, suspended his sentence, so that it should not coincide the mourning for this wicked man with his mourning period. Afterward, he became ill for 3 days and died. A Talmudist had stated that if one was ill 3 days and died, it is a death of a plague, Midrash Shmuel 23:13. However, our rabbis in Talmud Rosh Hashanah 18a stated that these are the 10 days of repentance, which the Holy One, blessed is he, waited for Nabal to repent. But some, in the same place, say that they correspond to the 10 meals which Nabal gave David's servants, for David had sent him 10 youths, and he fed them. Yeah.
No, but they did mention about how the day that it was the beginning of the year, right? With Rosh Hashanah at one point. So the 10 days
Yeah, the shearing
being
of
the
the
10
sheep
days
and the...
between the 10 days between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, known as the 10 days of repentance.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. On verse 41, Auld comments, Abigail's response to David's messengers is interesting. First of all, she treats his representatives, his ambassadors, as she has David himself, doing full obeisance before them on the ground. And then she says that she is ready to serve them below her status. It is not always easy to detect the difference between Amma, handmaid, and Shifcha, maidservant. However, where they are clearly distinguished, as here, the Shifcha has the lower status. Writing of Ruth, Sasson notes that on her first encounter with Boaz in Ruth 2:13, she describes herself as Shifcha. He comments on her new self-description in 3:9, quote, by now, using the term Amma, Ruth imagines herself as ranking among those females who might be taken by a free man, either as a concubine or as a wife, end quote. For the widow of Nabal, about to be wife to David, the term Amma might already suggest self-abasement. But describing herself as a shifcha and ready to wash the feet of David's staff is to go a stage still further. On verse 43,
I just always find it disgusting how a virtuous woman has to always be seen as groveling and debasing herself before men. Because, if we didn't write her that way, she wouldn't be a virtuous woman.
On verse 43, Achinoam of Jezreel, of Yisrael in Hebrew. Saul also married a certain Achinoam, daughter of Achimaaz, in 1450. Although Levinson argued that Achinoam of Jezreel and Achinoam, Saul's wife, are the same person, most commentators reject this interpretation. And finally, on verse 44, traditional commentators asked how could Saul marry Michal to somebody else given that she was married to David? Rabbi Yochanan, in Talmud Sanhedrin 19b, claimed that Palti did not have sex with her by, quote, embedding a sword in the bed between him and her, and said anyone who engages in this manner, i.e. sexual intercourse, should be stabbed by this sword, end quote. Although he was married to Michal, he acted as if she was David's wife. Kimchi, however, wrote that either Saul forced David to divorce Michal, which made it invalid, in Hebrew get me'useh, or that David cancelled the divorcement before he sent the bill by a messenger. Thus, Saul thought that Palti's marriage was valid.
I mean, he's king. Can't he just say, I nullify your marriage?
Yeah.
Exactly.
Probably. But I think the rabbis didn't like that.
Right.
They didn't be able to do that, so they had to...
I mean,
yeah.
She's his daughter. Entering into a political marriage is, what he expects of her. So, obviously, I think it does parallel how they married off Samson's wife to someone else when he left. You noticed that last time, Lawrence, but I feel so bad for this poor girl.
Now I have Christians as well. Bede writes that Nabal typifies the teachers of the law, while Abigail represents the synagogue, which wisely understood and carried out the word of faith. Gregory the Great wrote that following Abigail's laudable... Sorry?
I thought Bede was a Christian.
He was.
So why is he saying that Abigail represents the synagogue? I thought she's supposed to be a good character. I thought...
Oh, no, this is the good synagogue. Those who...
I see. The word synagogue doesn't have a negative connotation
it does,
unless it's...
Not in this case. It usually does. Okay. The synagogue of Satan. Yeah.
Oh,
totally,
okay.
But not this one.
Okay.
Yeah. And Gregory the Great wrote that following Abigail's laudable example, correction should be offered when the mind is not intoxicated in order for it to be of any benefit. And finally, Ambrose writes that the marital union of David and Abigail signifies the mystery of the union of the church of the Gentiles with Christ.
So mysterious.
Yeah, sure it does. Because Jesus is in here somewhere.
Yeah.
He says as he opens his cup.
You know, nobody in the whole of the Old Testament can have sex without mystically signifying the union of Christ to the church.
I can't piss in a cave without signifying Christ.
You certainly cannot.
Yeah.
All right. What was that? Was that it, Tomer? On the commentary?
And your camera is frozen.
Oh,
My camera's frozen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It is, yeah.
You look
I
like our
don't-
emote.
Ah,
I
true,
don't-
true. Actually, the thing is, I don't think Aaron's even seen that emote.
No. I don't think
Maybe
it does.
Oh,
Oh.
there he goes. All right.
You
Well-
know, Mark vanished a couple minutes ago, and I'm like, is he having a technical difficulty? And then Aaron. Okay.
Aaron has just
he
reconnected.
just refreshed. That's fine.
Yep. And I see that we lost Mark.
Yeah, he
Yeah.
said he had to do something.
All right. Well, sorry he had to dump out. Let me
And
read the.
Comment.
Yeah, that
We
was
did
all.
read the
we got
last
all the
comments. So we are looking at, because I'm guessing we're not going to go any further today. We did 3 hours today.
Yeah.
Are we moving to 1 Samuel 26 next week?
yes. And
Yes.
yeah, and 28 is the Witch of Endor.
Oh,
So
I
we might
love
go
the
there.
Witch of Endor.
Oh,
come-
yeah.
We should come dressed up.
Ooh, that
Or-
sounds fun.
Do
I'll
a
see if I can get some
do a seance or
like a
something.
crone thing going on. I just need, a cowl. Maybe some dramatic makeup. I can do that.
Victorian
I can do that.
seance. Seance, that's the right word. Yeah. Oh, I did want to add one last thing to the last question about the tar. So yeah, so there's like it says Jesus of Nazareth in that version of the Talmud is boiling in excrement. But it also right before that, Onkelos, the guy who's like the guy who made the
Targum.
translation, the guy who wrote the translation, Targum Onkelos. These stories are like legendary stories about him. When he was a famous convert to Judaism, Greek, I think, and so before he decided to convert, he raised up from the dead multiple people to find out, is this a good idea? Should I convert to Judaism or not? And so I think first
Wait,
guy he brought up
before
was,
he decides, he raises a bunch of dead people.
yeah, he
Oh
raised
yeah,
up 3 dead people.
resurrection was like it was like, very common. It was like happy hour. You just anytime.
He's a Greek. He's a Greek at this point. He hasn't converted yet, so it's like not as bad that he did that. So the first person he brought up was like Trajan or something. Not Trajan. Whatever. Some Greek person, I think. And he asked him like, okay, who in heaven is exalted? And he's like, oh, the children of Israel. And he's like, okay, and what punishment are you getting? And he's like, well, I'm getting the punishment that I gave them, which is my body is being burnt and like thrown around the seas, and every day it comes back and does it again. And then he raises up Balaam, and he asks Balaam a certain question, and then he asks him his punishment, and he's like, oh, I'm being boiled in a vat of semen. And then he raises
Is it
title
donkey
title
semen?
of Isaac's sex tape.
and then he raises Jesus, and Jesus is like, oh, I'm in a vat of excrement. And also the 3 different characters like say, he asked him, should I convert? Should I join them? And the first guy's like, nah, you should attack them, blah 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 blah. And then like Jesus says, no, you should join them, like be good to them. So the rabbis are like, you see, Jesus like got less of a punishment than Balaam because he was like a good guy.
How
kind
is
of.
boiling in excrement better than boiling in semen? I mean,
I don't know,
neither is ideal, obviously.
Something
What-
like that, or maybe the idea was like, oh, see, he's the Jewish man, even though he's being punished, is still going through that crazy punishment, is still telling you to convert, and like because and the non-Jewish man who's going through that punishment, he's all bitter and he's like
Resentful.
I think that's what they were trying to show, but it's a really weird story. Yeah. If anyone's looking for it, it's in Gittin 57a.
Should probably put that in the chat.
That would be good.
Oh yeah, in private chat or
No, in the actual live chat.
is it
Awesome.
get in 57?
Anyways, so that's our reading for the day, and I think that we'll probably get done with First Samuel within the next 2 weeks. So
Hopefully.
actually, yeah. So I think we have 5 chapters left. So we can do like 2 on.
No, we have 6.
6. Is it?
Yeah.
So 3
Okay.
and 3 ideally.
Ooh. All right. Yeah, I guess we can try to do that. Although I know that I'm gonna probably have a good amount of stuff for the Witch of Endor.
We'll see if we can get through the Witch of Endor next time, because we'll try and keep our comments and arguments about impossible things down to a minimum so we can get the Witch of Endor, because that's going to be awesome. And then that'll leave us, if we end on that, that'll leave us with 3 chapters for the next, and then we're done the book.
And in the meantime, make sure you join the Discord, and also.
Did we read the last comment?
On my channel, we
Super
started.
chats?
No, we didn't actually.
So on my channel this past week, we started the Quran. We did our first episode. I think it went pretty well, and we're going to be doing that every Wednesday. And we decided to go with the name secular.
I forgot to ask you, Lawrence, or I don't remember what the answer was. Are you doing Order of Revelations, or are you just doing it the way it's printed?
The way it's printed.
Okay.
Yeah. So if what was I gonna say? Right. So the show's called Secular Ultra Quran.
I bet it sucks.
Yeah, it sucks. Get it? Yeah.
And I have to apologize, Lawrence. I so wanted to be on that first show, but I've had a hell of a week.
Oh no, it's all good. It went over 2 hours, just me and Ruben, because we did a fairly long introduction to the Quran. Kind of.
Did you look into any of the other people that were mentioned previously?
The people that were
people that were on my show.
One of them did reach out, and I will probably have some of those people on. Although I do have to reach out to the other people that were on your show. Yeah. But yeah, I think eventually, but for that first episode, I knew we'd have so much commentary by ourselves that I was like, I don't really want to extend this. So.
Outsiders do need to kind of be brought in. I know I don't know enough about the Quran to, without a good, introductory.
If I remember correctly, I mean, the second chapter, that's the largest chapter in the whole fucking thing.
Yes, that's why we only read part of it.
I think we did that in 3 episodes.
Right, yeah, that makes sense.
Believe it. Anyway, I have to go make souvlaki and a bunch of other stuff. So, are we wrapping up?
Yeah.
Oh, there's the chat.
Oh, this
now.
last
And I think
super
that was a euphemism for defecation. Is that what that was?
No, it's Greek food. I'm a very good cook. Now, what was the last super chat? Read it, Aaron.
Jupiter Quake offers $5 and says, I just plain old love witches. Happy early Halloween.
Witches are awesome.
And spoiler alert, she wasn't a witch. Not biblically.
But
I'm not a witch.
It's still a very cool story.
Yeah, it is. It is.
No.
It is a very interesting.
Wave the same as a duck.
This is not my nose, it's a false one. All right, let's get out of here before we get even more nerdy.
Yeah. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.